Don't show up and spoil my mother's birthday, my wife warned. I simply smiled and walked away. That night, the headlines broke. My company had been sold for millions. Everyone at her mom's party saw the news. So there I was, standing in my own kitchen like some kind of idiot Boy Scout, clutching a bottle of Chateau Margaux 2015 that cost me $300 and probably a small piece of my dignity. The bottle had this fancy label with gold lettering that practically screamed, "I'm trying too hard to impress my in-laws." But hey, desperate times call for expensive wines, right? My mother-in-law, Patricia, or Patty the passive-aggressive as I affectionately called her in my head, was turning 60 in 3 days, and apparently this particular vintage was her absolute favorite, which she'd mentioned approximately 4,000 times during last Thanksgiving's dinner while giving me pointed looks about how some people appreciate the finer things in life. I walked into the kitchen feeling pretty good about myself, honestly. The wine guy at the boutique store had assured me this was top-shelf stuff, the kind of bottle that says, "I care about you," without actually having to say it out loud, which is basically the love language of my wife's entire family. My wife, Clara, was doing her usual counterlean thing, one hip cocked against the granite countertop we'd renovated last year, scrolling through her phone with the intensity of a day trader watching the market crash. Except Clara wasn't checking stocks or bonds, or whatever rich people worry about. No, she was deep diving into her social media feeds, probably stalking her college sorority sisters, or reading through group chats where middle-aged women compared their children's accomplishments like they were trading Pokemon cards. The kitchen smelled like the vanilla candle she always insisted on burning, even though I'd told her a million times that vanilla-scented anything makes our house smell like a Bath and Body Works threw up in a Starbucks. But did she listen? Of course not. That would require acknowledging that I had opinions, which was apparently not part of our marriage contract. I cleared my throat, setting the wine bottle down on the counter with what I thought was an appropriate amount of casual confidence. "Got your mom's favorite," I said, trying to sound like the thoughtful son-in-law I was desperately attempting to be. The guy at the store said this is a particularly good year. Something about the weather in Bordeaux and the grape harvest and a bunch of other stuff I pretended to understand while nodding seriously. Clara didn't even glance up from her phone. Her thumb kept scrolling, like she was trying to reach the bottom of the internet itself. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, but was probably only about 15 seconds, watching her perfectly manicured nail tap against the screen. She'd just gotten them done yesterday, some complicated gel situation that cost more than my first car payment and came in a color she called dusty rose, but looked suspiciously like regular pink to my untrained eye. Finally, without even doing me the courtesy of making eye contact, she said, "Oh, by the way, don't show up to Mom's birthday party." I blinked. Once, twice, 3 times, like some kind of malfunctioning robot trying to process information that didn't compute. Surely I'd misheard her. Surely my wife of 5 years hadn't just uninvited me to a family event while simultaneously ignoring my $300 piece offering that was currently sitting on the counter between us like a very expensive, very awkward third wheel. "Come again," I said, because apparently my brain had short-circuited and those were the only 2 words it could produce. She let out this sigh, this dramatic, theatrical sigh that she'd clearly learned from watching too many reality TV shows, the kind of sigh that communicated both exhaustion and superiority in one impressive breath. "It's complicated," she said, still not looking at me, still scrolling through that stupid phone like it contained the secrets of the universe instead of just pictures of her friend Jennifer's vacation in the Maldives and some memes about wine o'clock. I waited. She didn't elaborate. Of course, she didn't elaborate. That would be too straightforward, too honest, too much like actual communication between 2 people who supposedly loved each other. "Complicated how?" I pressed, because I'm a glutton for punishment and apparently enjoyed torturing myself. Clara finally looked up from her phone, and I immediately wished she hadn't. She had on what I privately called her PR smile, that perfectly practiced expression she used when she was about to say something absolutely horrible, but wanted to package it in pretty wrapping paper with a bow on top. It was the same smile she used when telling her mother that her new haircut looked interesting, or when informing the waitress that her salad had too much dressing, but she was totally fine with it. No worries. There'll be investors there. she said slowly, like she was explaining quantum physics to a golden retriever. High society friends of Mom's. Important business contacts. Kenneth is bringing his new girlfriend, and apparently she's some kind of social media influencer with like 500,000 followers or something ridiculous. You know, people who matter in certain circles. I felt something cold settle in my stomach, somewhere between disbelief and that specific brand of anger that comes from being completely unsurprised by someone's cruelty. So, I don't matter? I said, keeping my voice level, which took more effort than I care to admit. She did this little head tilt thing, like she was considering the question with genuine thoughtfulness, which somehow made it worse. You just don't fit the crowd, she said carefully, choosing her words like she was defusing a bomb. It's not personal, babe. It's just that Mom wants to maintain a certain image, and with all these potential investors and business partners coming, she thinks it would be better if we kept things focused on the right connections. You understand, right? It's about optics. Oh, good, I said, nodding slowly. For a second there, I thought it was personal. But you're right. It's just about me being fundamentally inadequate for your family's social standards. Much better. Really takes the sting out of it. She didn't laugh. She didn't even crack a smile. Instead, she looked at me with this mixture of pity and annoyance, like I was a child having a tantrum about not getting dessert before dinner. Don't be dramatic, she said, turning back to her phone. You're making this harder than it needs to be. I stood there for another moment, looking at the expensive wine bottle, looking at my wife, looking at the life I'd somehow built where I could be uninvited to family events in my own kitchen on a random Tuesday afternoon like it was no big deal. The vanilla candle flickered on the counter, filling the air with its cloying sweetness, and I suddenly felt very tired. But instead of yelling, instead of arguing, instead of pointing out the 17 different ways this conversation was absolutely insane, I just smiled. A real smile this time, not one of Clara's PR specials, but a genuine smile that came from some deep well of absurdity inside me. No worries, I said cheerfully, way too cheerfully for someone who'd just been told they weren't good enough for their own in-laws. Wouldn't want to spoil the ambience with my middle-class aura. Might accidentally use the wrong fork or say something embarrassing like, nice to meet you, instead of delighted to make your acquaintance. The horror. I picked up the wine bottle, my $300 gesture of goodwill that had lasted all of 30 seconds before becoming completely pointless, and set it back down with a gentle thunk. Give this to your mom with my regards, I said. Tell her I hope she has a wonderful party with all the right people who matter in all the right ways. Then I walked out of the kitchen, leaving Clara to her scrolling and her social climbing and her complicated explanations that somehow always ended with me being not quite enough. Behind me, I heard her call out something that might have been my name or might have been wait, but I didn't stop to find out. I'd learned a long time ago that sometimes the best response to disrespect isn't anger or arguments. Sometimes it's just walking away and letting people sit with their own garbage. 3 days until Patricia's Big 6-0. 3 days until a party I wasn't invited to. 3 days until everything changed in ways that none of them could possibly see coming. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Here's the thing about being underestimated. It's simultaneously the most annoying and the most useful position you can occupy in life. Clara and her entire family, from Patricia down to her cousin Gerald, who still lived in his parents' basement at 37, saw me as aggressively average. I was the quiet husband who worked on computers, which is basically code for, we have no idea what he does, but it involves screens and probably isn't important. I wore sneakers to family dinners instead of those overpriced leather loafers that Kenneth liked to show off, the ones that cost $600 and looked like they'd been designed by someone who'd never actually walked anywhere. I drove a Toyota instead of a BMW. I said, you too, when waiters told me to enjoy my meal. In their eyes, I was basically one step above a mall kiosk employee, and honestly, they treated me with about the same level of respect. What they didn't know, what they couldn't possibly know because they'd never bothered to ask a single meaningful question about my work, was that I owned Datastride Analytics, a company I'd co-founded 8 years ago with my best friend and certified genius, Alex Navarro. Alex was this brilliant, slightly manic software engineer who survived almost entirely on cold brew coffee and spite. The man once coded for 36 hours straight during a critical product launch and legitimately forgot it was his birthday until his mom called him crying, because he hadn't answered her texts. He showed up to our first investor meeting wearing a hoodie that said, "I void warranties," and somehow still managed to charm the room with his technical wizardry. That's the kind of partner you want when you're building something from scratch. Someone who cares more about the code than the optics. We'd started DataStride in my one-bedroom apartment back when I was dating Clara, before the wedding, before her family decided I was an acceptable but disappointing addition to their gene pool. The apartment was tiny, one of those places where you could cook dinner, watch TV, and answer the door without moving more than 5 feet in any direction. Our entire server infrastructure lived on a coffee table we bought from IKEA for $40, assembled incorrectly, and then fixed with duct tape and prayers. We had exactly 3 clients in those first 6 months, and I'm pretty sure 2 of them only hired us because they felt bad after seeing our office setup. Alex slept on my couch more nights than I could count, usually passing out mid-sentence while explaining some complex algorithm that I pretended to fully understand. But we had a vision, and more importantly, we had a solution to a real problem. Mid-sized businesses were drowning in data. Customer information, sales figures, inventory tracking, employee records, and they had no efficient way to process it all. Most of them were still using Excel spreadsheets that crashed every other day and database systems that looked like they'd been designed during the Clinton administration. We built a software platform that could automate all of that, integrate everything into one clean dashboard, and actually make sense of the chaos. It wasn't sexy. It wasn't some flashy app that would get written up in TechCrunch with a headline about disrupting the industry. It was just incredibly, beautifully useful, and that turned out to be enough. We bootstrapped everything, which is a fancy way of saying we were broker than broke and funded the company with credit cards, freelance gigs, and an alarming amount of ramen noodles. Alex picked up side projects building websites for local businesses. I did contract work designing database systems for whoever would hire me. We poured every dollar back into DataStride, improving the software, fixing bugs, adding features that our clients actually asked for instead of ones we thought looked cool. It was unglamorous and exhausting, and there were about 17 different moments when we almost gave up entirely, but we didn't. Mostly because we were too stubborn and stupid to know when to quit. Slowly, painfully, the company grew. 3 clients became 10. 10 became 50. We hired our first employee, a woman named Sarah who was somehow even more obsessed with data optimization than Alex, which I didn't think was possible. We moved out of my apartment and into an actual office space, one of those trendy co-working situations with exposed brick and motivational posters about synergy. Clara came to visit exactly once, looked around at the hodgepodge of mismatched desks and whiteboards covered in incomprehensible diagrams, and said, "It's very startup Y," in a tone that suggested she was talking about a communicable disease. I tried explaining the business to her family exactly one time, at a Christmas dinner during our 2nd year of operation. Patricia had asked what I did for a living, not because she cared, but because her friend Diane was there, and Patricia needed to fill awkward silence with something other than the sound of Kenneth chewing with his mouth open. I launched into this explanation about data processing and automation software, and how we were helping businesses streamline their operations, and I watched every single eye at that table glaze over like I was reciting the phone book in Mandarin. Patricia interrupted me halfway through with, "So you fix computers?" Kenneth snorted into his wine glass. Clara's dad, Richard, just nodded and said, "That's nice, son," before immediately changing the subject to golf, which apparently was a more intellectually stimulating topic than the company I'd built from nothing. After that, I stopped trying. Why bother explaining cloud architecture and API integrations to people who thought Wi-Fi was magic and couldn't figure out how to update their iPhone apps? It was easier to just smile and nod when they made their little jokes about me being the IT guy, or asked if I could fix their printer. Yeah, sure, I'll get right on that. Right after I finish managing our 300 corporate clients and coordinating with our development team across 3 continents. But you go ahead and think I'm just really good with Microsoft Word. The irony was delicious, though. While Clara's family was busy networking with their country club friends and humble bragging about Kenneth's middle management position at his father-in-law's real estate company, Alex and I were actually building something real. We weren't just talking about business and success and making connections. We were doing it, line by line, client by client, problem by problem. We worked nights and weekends. We dealt with server crashes at 3 in the morning and angry clients who thought their issues were emergencies. We learned about payroll and taxes and legal compliance and all the boring, unglamorous stuff that nobody warns you about when you're dreaming of being an entrepreneur. And it worked. Against all odds and despite my complete lack of fancy shoes, it actually worked. By year 5, we had clients in 12 states. By year 6, we'd expanded internationally, opening a small office in Toronto and another in London. By year 7, we had over 300 active clients and a team of 45 employees who were way smarter than me and Alex combined. We weren't just surviving anymore. We were thriving, and nobody in my wife's family had a single clue. I kept it quiet, deliberately and completely. I didn't post about it on social media. I didn't name-drop DataStride at family dinners. I didn't correct people when they assumed I was some kind of low-level tech support guy who fixed email problems for a living. Part of it was privacy. I genuinely didn't need or want their validation. But part of it, the darker and more honest part, was curiosity. I wanted to see how they'd treat me without knowing. Wanted to understand who these people really were when they thought I was beneath them. And boy, did they show me. Clara knew I had a company, but she'd never bothered to learn the details, never asked about revenue or growth, or any of the milestones that kept me up at night with equal parts terror and excitement. To her, DataStride was my little tech thing, a hobby business that probably made enough money to be respectable, but not enough to be impressive. She had no idea about our client list, no clue about our expansion plans, no concept of the deals we were negotiating or the industry recognition we'd earned. And honestly, I never told her because she never asked. That's marriage, baby, two people living parallel lives and calling it partnership. So yeah, I was a nobody in their eyes. The forgettable son-in-law with the computer job and the boring shoes and the unfortunate habit of not being rich or important or connected enough to matter at birthday parties. What they didn't know was about to become everyone's problem. The same week that Clara uninvited me from her mother's birthday party like I was some kind of embarrassing plus one she'd regretted bringing to prom, Alex and I were in the middle of finalizing the biggest deal of our lives. And when I say biggest, I don't mean pretty good or nice bonus big. I mean the kind of big that makes you question if you're living in actual reality or if you've somehow slipped into an alternate universe where things actually work out for regular people who started their companies on IKEA furniture. Tech Venture Global, or TVG as the cool kids called it. And yes, there were apparently cool kids in corporate acquisitions, wanted to buy DataStride Analytics. Not just invest in it, not just partner with it, but straight up acquire the whole thing for an amount of money that still made my brain short-circuit every time I thought about it too hard. $320 million. That's $320 million for those of you keeping track at home, which is the kind of number that only exists in movies about tech bros or drug cartels. And yet here we were, living in that reality. We'd been negotiating this deal for 6 months, which in business time feels like approximately 40 years. It started back in March when Margaret Reeves, the CEO of Tech Venture Global, reached out through her acquisition team after reading about us in some industry publication that I didn't even know existed. Apparently, DataStride had made enough noise in the business software world that the big players were paying attention, which was news to me since I was still mentally categorizing us as that scrappy startup that might fall apart at any moment. The negotiation process was absolutely insane. We had lawyers, multiple lawyers, expensive lawyers, lawyers who billed by the quarter hour and probably charged you for thinking about your case while they were in the shower. We had financial audits, where people went through every single transaction we'd ever made since day one, including that time Alex expensed a pizza at 2 in the morning and labeled it critical infrastructure support. We had due diligence calls at unholy hours because half our acquisition team was based in Singapore and apparently didn't believe in reasonable time zones. We had video conferences where people used words like synergy and vertical integration and strategic alignment without a trace of irony, just saying them straight-faced like they meant something real instead of being corporate Mad Libs. Alex handled it way better than I did, probably because his brain was already wired for chaos and he treated the whole thing like an extremely complicated puzzle that needed solving. I, on the other hand, spent most of those 6 months in a state of low-grade panic, convinced that at any moment someone would realize we were just two guys who'd started this whole thing on a broken coffee table and the deal would evaporate like a fever dream. But it didn't evaporate. It kept moving forward, step by step, contract by contract, revision by revision, until suddenly it was Friday, and we were actually going to sign the papers. The signing happened at Tech Venture Global's downtown offices, which occupied the top 3 floors of one of those glass skyscrapers that looked like they were designed by someone who'd never experienced weather. Everything was aggressively modern and expensive looking, the kind of place where even the staplers probably cost more than my first car. The conference room where we gathered had floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, a table made of some exotic wood that definitely came from a tree that had a name and a biography, and chairs that were somehow both uncomfortable and pretentious at the same time. The room smelled like fresh espresso and expensive paper, which I guess is what $300 million smells like. There were maybe 15 people there, lawyers, executives, the CFO whose name I could never remember, but who always wore bow ties like he was auditioning for a barbershop quartet, and various other important business people who did important business things. Everyone had leather portfolios and fancy pens, and this air of casual confidence that comes from making deals like this every other Tuesday. Margaret Reeves sat at the head of the table, looking exactly like a CEO should look, impeccably dressed, perfectly composed, radiating the kind of authority that comes from decades of telling people what to do and having them actually do it. She was in her late 50s, sharp as hell, and had this reputation in the industry for being both brilliant and terrifying in equal measure. I'd heard stories about her negotiations that made Game of Thrones look like a children's book about sharing. But when she shook my hand after we signed the final document, her smile was genuine. "Congratulations," she said, and her grip was firm without being aggressive, which I appreciated because I was already nervous enough without getting into a dominance handshake situation. "You've built something truly remarkable here. DataStride isn't just good software. It's elegant software, which is rare. You should be very proud." "Thank you," I said, trying to sound like someone who regularly sold companies for 9 figures instead of someone who was internally screaming. "It's mostly held together by coffee and trauma, but yeah, I'm proud." "We both are." I nodded toward Alex, who was grinning like he'd just won the lottery, which I guess technically we both had. Margaret laughed, an actual human laugh that made her seem less like a corporate robot and more like a person who understood that building a company was 50% strategy and 50% barely controlled chaos. "The best companies usually are," she said. "Coffee and trauma are underrated ingredients for success." She handed me a folder, fancy cardstock, embossed logo, the whole 9 yards, and said, "The press release goes live at 6 p.m. tonight. Every major business publication will have it within minutes. You might want to prepare for some attention. Maybe take the weekend to celebrate. You've earned it." "Oh, I will," I said, grinning wider than I probably should have been in a professional setting. "Just not at my in-laws' place." "Long story." She raised an eyebrow but didn't push, which was probably for the best because I didn't need to explain my family drama to a woman who'd just handed me generational wealth. Instead, she moved on to Alex, congratulating him on his technical genius and promising that the engineering team would be in good hands under the new structure. Alex nodded enthusiastically, already talking about product roadmaps and feature development like we hadn't just fundamentally changed our entire lives 5 minutes ago. After the signing, we did the corporate photo thing, everyone standing around the conference table, holding up the signed documents like we'd just caught a really expensive fish. Someone from their PR team took about 100 pictures from different angles, probably so they could pick the one where everyone looked successful and nobody was blinking weird. I shook hands with what felt like every person in the building, including the receptionist who seemed genuinely excited for us, which was nice. Alex and I finally escaped to the parking garage around 5:30, both of us carrying copies of the signed agreements in those fancy folders that felt too important to just throw in a backpack. We stood next to my Toyota, my very ordinary, very paid-off Toyota that was now owned by someone who could buy 100 Toyotas without checking his bank account, and just looked at each other. "We did it," Alex said quietly, like he was afraid saying it too loud would somehow undo everything. "We did it," I agreed. "We actually did it, man. We sold our company for $320 million. That's a real thing that just happened. Your in-laws are going to lose their minds," he said, and started laughing. "Dude, Clara told you not to come to the party tonight because you weren't important enough." This is the best timing in the history of timing. I checked my watch. 5:35. The press release would go live in 25 minutes. Patricia's party was already underway, probably hitting that sweet spot where everyone had enough champagne to be chatty, but not enough to be sloppy. Clara was probably making small talk with investors, talking up Kenneth's girlfriend's Instagram following, doing all the social climbing that apparently mattered so much more than her own husband. You know what? I said, I'm going home. I'm ordering Chinese food. I'm putting on sweatpants. And I'm going to watch this whole thing blow up from the comfort of my couch like the nobody I am. Alex grinned. That's the most beautiful revenge I've ever heard. It's not revenge, I said, unlocking my car. It's just really, really good timing. At exactly 5:30 p.m., while Clara's entire family was gathered at Patricia's mansion, and I do mean mansion, the kind of place that has a name like Windermere Estate, and comes with its own driveway that takes 45 seconds to drive down. I was sprawled across my couch in sweatpants that had a hole in the left knee and a stain of mysterious origin near the pocket. The sweatpants were at least 7 years old, older than some of my friendships, and they'd reached that perfect level of worn-in comfort where they basically felt like wearing a cloud. My t-shirt said, I paused my game to be here, in faded letters, which felt appropriate given that I'd literally been uninvited from a family event for not being impressive enough. I had Chinese takeout spread across my coffee table like I was conducting some kind of delicious archaeological dig. Kung Pao chicken, pork fried rice, egg rolls that were still hot enough to burn the roof of my mouth if I wasn't careful, and those little wontons in hot oil that probably took years off my life, but tasted like heaven wrapped in dough. I was eating straight from the containers with chopsticks, occasionally dropping rice on my shirt, and not even caring, because that's what washing machines were for. This was freedom. This was bliss. This was what Friday night looked like when you weren't busy pretending to be someone you weren't for the benefit of people who'd already decided you weren't good enough. Patricia's party, meanwhile, was probably in full swing. I could picture it perfectly because I'd been to enough of these events to know the formula by heart. The mansion would be decorated with those elegant flower arrangements that cost more than most people's monthly rent, the kind that looked like they'd been assembled by someone with a degree in botanical architecture. There would be a catering company, not just any catering company, but one of those boutique operations that Patricia loved to brag about discovering, even though literally everyone in their social circle used the same one. The servers would be wearing matching uniforms and carrying trays of hors d'oeuvres with names I couldn't pronounce. Tiny pieces of food on tiny plates that somehow cost $50 per person and left you hungry enough to hit a drive-thru on the way home. The guest list would be Patricia's greatest hits collection of important people. There'd be Richard's business partners from the investment firm, all wearing expensive suits and talking about market trends like they were discussing sports scores. There'd be Patricia's country club friends, women who lunched professionally and could discuss the merits of different spa treatments with the seriousness of UN peace negotiations. Kenneth would be there with his new girlfriend, the Instagram influencer whose 500,000 followers apparently made her more valuable than someone who'd been married into the family for 5 years. Clara's Aunt Susan would be holding court in the corner, telling the same stories about her trip to the Amalfi Coast that she'd told at every family gathering since 2019. And everyone, absolutely everyone, would be dressed in cocktail attire that required dry cleaning and uncomfortable shoes. I took a bite of Kung Pao chicken and sighed contentedly. This was so much better. At exactly 6 p.m., my phone buzzed with a text from Alex. It was just 2 words and 7 exclamation marks. It's out. I grabbed the TV remote, which had been buried under a napkin, and flipped to the local business news channel. And there it was, breaking news banner scrolling across the bottom of the screen like it was announcing the end of the world or the start of a zombie apocalypse. Local entrepreneur sells DataStride Analytics for $320 million. My face popped up on screen. It was a photo from our company website. One of those professional headshots where they make you smile until your face hurts, and then take about 300 pictures until they find one where you don't look like a hostage. Next to my photo was a shot of our office building, looking way more impressive on TV than it did in real life. My name scrolled across the bottom in that official news font. Daniel Morrison, co-founder and CEO. I almost choked on a piece of chicken. Like, actually choked. Had to cough and reach for my water bottle while staring at the TV screen in disbelief. It was one thing to know intellectually that this was happening. It was another thing entirely to see your face on the news with a dollar amount that looked like a phone number next to it. The anchor, a woman named Stephanie Chun who I'd seen on TV 1,000 times but never imagined would be talking about me, was reading from her teleprompter with that practiced enthusiasm that news anchors must learn in anchor school. In a major acquisition deal announced this evening, local tech company Datastride Analytics has been purchased by TechVenture Global for $320 million. The company, founded 8 years ago by Daniel Morrison and Alex Navarro, provides data processing and automation software to businesses across North America and Europe. They cut to footage of our office, showing employees working at their desks, which was weird because I didn't remember anyone filming that. Then they showed the TechVenture Global logo, some stock footage of people in business meetings looking very serious about business, and then back to my headshot. Morrison, who kept a relatively low profile in the local business community, built Datastride from a bootstrap startup to a major player in the business software industry. Stephanie continued. The acquisition marks one of the largest tech deals in the region this year. I sat there on my couch, in my ancient sweatpants, holding chopsticks in one hand and the remote in the other, watching myself become news. It was surreal. It was absurd. It was absolutely perfect timing considering where my wife currently was and who she was currently with. My phone started buzzing. Not just one notification, but multiple, overlapping, the kind of digital assault that usually means something has gone very right or very wrong. LinkedIn was exploding. I had 17 new connection requests in the span of 2 minutes. My email inbox was filling up faster than I could watch it. Journalists wanted interviews. Industry publications wanted comments. Random people from my past were suddenly remembering that we'd been close, even though I hadn't spoken to them since high school graduation. I opened my messages and nearly spit out my fried rice. There was a text from Kenneth, Clara's brother, the same Kenneth who'd once referred to me as a budget husband at a family barbecue where he thought I was out of earshot. Bro, the message read, and I could already feel my eye twitching at the word bro, coming from someone who'd never called me that in his entire life. Proud of you, man. Really proud. We should grab lunch sometime. Connect properly, you know? Network a bit. I've got some ideas I'd love to run by you. I laughed out loud, an actual snort laugh that echoed in my empty living room. Kenneth wanted to network with me now. Kenneth, who couldn't be bothered to say more than 3 words to me at family dinners, who always managed to position himself physically away from me in group photos, who'd once asked Clara, right in front of me, if she was sure about this whole marriage thing. That Kenneth wanted to grab lunch and talk about ideas. Yeah, sure thing, Kenny, I muttered to my phone. Right after I schedule that meeting with NASA and coffee with the Pope. I'll have my people call your people. We'll do lunch. It'll be great. More texts came in. Clara's cousin Michelle, who'd always treated me like I was invisible at family gatherings, suddenly wanted to congratulate me and catch up sometime. Patricia's friend Diane, who'd once asked me if I'd ever considered getting a real job, sent a LinkedIn connection request with a note about exciting collaboration opportunities. Even people from my college days who'd never responded to a single message I'd sent over the years were suddenly coming out of the woodwork like I was having some kind of reunion party and everyone was invited. My phone rang. Real deal phone call, not just a text. The caller ID showed a local number I didn't recognize. I answered, mostly because I was curious and also because the Kung Pao chicken could wait 30 seconds. Hello, is this Daniel Morrison? A professional-sounding woman asked. Speaking, I said, trying to swallow my food quickly and probably failing. Mr. Morrison, this is Jennifer Walsh from Channel 7 News. We're putting together a spotlight segment on local business success stories, and we'd love to have you on tonight's Late Show if you're available. We could send a car for you in about an hour. I looked down at my sweatpants, my stained t-shirt, the Chinese food containers scattered across my coffee table like casualties of war. My hair was doing that thing where it stuck up in the back because I'd been lying on the couch. I had soy sauce on my thumb. Can you make it in 2 hours instead? I asked. I need to shower and find pants that don't have holes in them. Jennifer laughed. 2 hours works perfectly. We'll send a car to your address at 8. This is going to be a great segment, Mr. Morrison. Congratulations on your success. Thanks, I said. And please, call me Daniel. Mr. Morrison makes me sound like someone who knows what he's doing. After I hung up, I sat there for another minute, just processing. In the span of 30 minutes, I'd gone from eating Chinese food in sweatpants to being invited on the evening news. My phone was still buzzing with notifications. The TV was still showing clips about the acquisition, cycling through the same information with different camera angles. And somewhere across town, at a party I'd been explicitly told not to attend, my wife and her family were probably having a very different kind of evening than they'd planned. I picked up another egg roll and bit into it, savoring the crispy exterior and the slightly greasy interior that health experts would definitely not approve of. Well, I said to my empty living room, to my ancient sweatpants, to the TV screen still showing my face, guess I should find a turtleneck or something. Gotta look the part of a tech entrepreneur, right? The universe, as usual, didn't respond. But my phone buzzed again, and I could practically feel the shockwaves traveling across the city toward Patricia's mansion, toward the party full of important people, toward the moment when someone inevitably checked their phone and saw the news. This was going to be good. At 6:12 p.m., exactly 12 minutes after the press release went live and approximately 3 minutes after I'd committed to appearing on live television while still having soy sauce on my fingers, my phone rang again. This time, the caller ID made me smile so wide I probably looked like the Joker having a really good day. It was Clara, my beloved wife. The woman who told me just 3 days ago that I wasn't suitable company for her mother's birthday party. The same woman who was currently at said party, surrounded by all those important people who mattered so much more than her middle-class, computer-fixing, embarrassingly average husband. I let it ring twice more, just for the satisfaction of it, while I chewed another bite of fried rice and considered my options. I could not answer. I could send it to voicemail and let her stew in whatever chaos was currently unfolding at Windermere Estate. That would be the mature, dignified thing to do. But maturity is overrated, and I was feeling petty in the best possible way, so I swiped to answer. "Hello," I said, going for casual, like I was maybe folding laundry or reading a book instead of watching my face appear on 3 different news channels simultaneously. "Did you sell your company?" Clara's voice came through the phone at a volume that could probably be heard by everyone within a 50-foot radius of her. She wasn't just yelling, she was shrieking, hitting notes that I didn't know her vocal cords were capable of producing. I had to pull the phone away from my ear for a second to protect what remained of my hearing. "Hi, honey," I said cheerfully, putting the phone back to my ear once I was sure she'd stopped screaming. "How's the party? Having a good time with all those people who matter? Don't you dare be sarcastic with me right now." She was still yelling, but at least she'd dropped from jet engine levels to merely construction site levels. "Everyone is freaking out. My mom's friends saw you on the news." "On the news, Daniel? The TV is literally on in the living room right now, and your face is on it. Behind the birthday cake. While we're trying to celebrate." I tried very hard not to laugh and failed spectacularly. The image of my headshot hovering behind Patricia's elaborate birthday cake, like some kind of corporate ghost, was too perfect. "Tell them I said hi," I replied, popping a piece of Kung Pao chicken into my mouth. "And happy birthday to your mom. Sorry I couldn't be there in person, but apparently I didn't fit the crowd. Something about not being important enough. Ring any bells?" There was a moment of silence on the other end, and I could practically hear the gears turning in Clara's head as she tried to figure out how to handle this situation. She'd clearly called expecting me to explain myself, maybe apologize for making such a big announcement without warning her, possibly beg for forgiveness for embarrassing her in front of her family's important friends. What she hadn't expected was for me to be eating Chinese food and throwing her own words back at her like a boomerang made of pure karma. "Why didn't you tell me?" Her voice had changed now, shifting from angry to something closer to desperate confusion. "We're married, Daniel. You sold your company for hundreds of millions of dollars, and you didn't think to mention it? Not even once. You didn't ask," I said simply, reaching for an egg roll. "In fact, you didn't ask about my work at all this week. You were too busy planning the party I wasn't invited to and making sure all the right people with all the right connections were going to be there. Datastride just wasn't important enough for the guest list. Kind of like me." I could hear commotion in the background now, voices raised in excitement or confusion or probably both. Someone was talking loudly about Tech Venture Global. Someone else was saying something about investments and opportunities. I heard Patricia's voice, shrill and commanding, cutting through the noise like a knife through butter. "Clara, get him here. Get him here right now." That made me smile even wider. Patricia, who'd signed off on my exclusion from this party, who'd probably been the one to suggest to Clara that I'd be better off staying home, was now demanding my presence like I was the guest of honor she'd forgotten to invite. The irony was so thick you could cut it with one of her fancy cheese knives. "Is that your mom?" I asked innocently. "She sounds stressed. Is everything okay?" "Of course everything is not okay," Clara hissed, and I could tell she'd moved away from the main party area because the background noise had gotten quieter. She was probably hiding in a bathroom or a hallway, trying to have this conversation without the entire party listening in. Everyone is asking questions. Dad wants to know why he didn't know about this. Kenneth is going around telling people he's your brother-in-law, like you two are best friends. Mom's investor friends are asking how to get in touch with you. This is insane. Sounds pretty wild, I agreed. Almost like having an important person at the party would have been useful. Too bad nobody important was invited. Daniel. She was switching tactics now, going for the pleading tone that usually worked when she wanted something. "Please, just come over and help us explain this. Everyone wants to meet you. Everyone wants to talk to you. Mom is having a meltdown. Dad is asking a million questions. Just come over for an hour. Please." I leaned back on my couch, surrounded by my Chinese food containers and my ancient sweatpants and my complete and utter lack of interest in saving Clara from the social nightmare of her own making. "Let me get this straight," I said slowly. 3 days ago, I wasn't good enough to attend this party because I didn't fit the crowd and might embarrass you in front of the important people. But now that those same important people found out I'm worth a few $100 million, suddenly I'm invited? Suddenly I fit the crowd? Suddenly you want me there? It's not like that. It's exactly like that, Clara. It's literally exactly like that. You uninvited me from a family event because you were embarrassed by me. And now you're uninviting that uninvitation because I'm suddenly valuable enough to be worth your time. Her father's voice boomed in the background, loud enough that I could hear it clearly through the phone. "Is that him? Let me talk to him. Daniel. Daniel. Son, we need to discuss this." Richard had never called me son in his entire life. He usually called me that guy, or Clara's husband, or occasionally just hey you, when he needed me to pass the salt at dinner. But now I was son. Now I was worth a personal conversation. Now I mattered. "Is that Richard?" I asked. "Tell him I'm busy. Tell him I'm working on computer stuff. You know, my little tech hobby." "You're being impossible," Clara snapped, and I could hear the tears starting in her voice. Not sad tears, but frustrated tears, the kind she got when things weren't going the way she'd planned, and she couldn't fix it with her PR smile and careful words. "This is important. These people are important. We need you here." "You mean you need me there?" I corrected. "You need me to show up and be the successful entrepreneur so you don't look bad in front of your mom's friends. You need me to validate Kenneth's sudden claim that we're tight. You need me to make your family look good by association." But here's the thing, Clara, you should have needed me 3 days ago. You should have wanted me there when I was just the boring computer guy. You should have thought I was worth including before I had a dollar amount attached to my name. There was actual crying now, soft sobs that she was trying to muffle. Part of me felt bad. A very small part. The rest of me was eating another egg roll and feeling pretty good about my life choices. "Please," she whispered. "Please just come. We can talk about everything else later. Just please come to the party." For me, I sighed. Not a sympathetic sigh, but the kind of sigh you make when someone is asking you to do something ridiculous and expecting you to go along with it. "You know what? I can't come to the party, Clara. I'm actually busy tonight." "Busy? Busy with what?" "I'm going on TV," I said casually. Channel 7 called. They want to do a spotlight segment on local business success stories. They're sending a car at 8. Pretty exciting, right? Your boring husband is going to be on television. The silence on the other end was so complete, I thought for a second the call had dropped. But then Clara spoke, her voice small and hollow. "You're going on TV. You're actually going on TV instead of coming here." "Yep. Wouldn't want to ruin my middle-class aura by showing up where I'm not wanted. Plus, the TV people seem really interested in talking to me, which is nice. Nobody at your party wanted to talk to me 3 days ago, so this is a refreshing change." I could hear her mother in the background again, closer this time. "What did he say? Is he coming? Clara, what is he saying?" Clara's voice was muffled, like she'd covered the phone with her hand, but I could still make out her words. "He's not coming. He's going to be on television instead." The eruption of voices that followed was beautiful. Patricia's shocked gasp. Richard's confused what? Kenneth's voice saying something about brand opportunity. The general murmur of confusion and dismay from what sounded like the entire party. Listen, I said, pulling her attention back to our conversation. Tell everyone I'm sorry I couldn't make it. Tell them I was busy building something valuable while they were busy deciding I wasn't valuable enough. Tell them they can watch me on Channel 7 at 10 if they want to see what the guy who didn't fit their crowd actually looks like when people who matter are paying attention. Daniel. And Clara? That wine I bought for your mom. The $300 bottle I got specifically because it was her favorite? It's still on the kitchen counter. You can give it to her as a gift from both of us. Consider it my contribution to a party I was never supposed to attend in the first place. Then I hung up, just pressed the end button and watched as Clara Mobile disappeared from my screen. My phone immediately started buzzing again. Her calling back, probably ready to alternate between apologizing and yelling, but I ignored it. I had Chinese food to finish and a television appearance to prepare for, and absolutely zero interest in being someone's convenient solution to a social disaster they'd created themselves. The TV was still showing news coverage of the acquisition. My phone was still blowing up with notifications. And somewhere across town, Patricia's 60th birthday party was probably descending into absolute chaos. It was shaping up to be a pretty good Friday night after all. Within an hour of hanging up on Clara, which felt better than any therapy session I'd ever had, not that I'd tell my therapist that, my entire digital existence exploded like someone had set off a social media nuclear bomb. My LinkedIn profile, which had been happily sitting at around 300 connections of actual professional contacts I'd worked with over the years, suddenly transformed into the most popular place on the internet that wasn't a cat video or a celebrity scandal. I refreshed my LinkedIn notifications and watched the number climb in real time. 52 new connection requests. Refresh. 87. Refresh again. 123. It was like watching a stock ticker during a market crash, except instead of losing money, I was gaining an alarming number of people who suddenly wanted to be professionally associated with me. People I'd never heard of were sending requests with personalized notes like, looking forward to connecting with a fellow innovator, and would love to discuss potential synergies. These were the same people who probably wouldn't have looked at my profile twice last week when I was just another software guy with a boring headshot and a job description that said data processing. My email inbox was even worse. I had over 200 unread messages, and they were still pouring in faster than I could scroll through them. There were journalists from publications I actually read asking for interviews. There were podcasters wanting me on their shows to discuss the entrepreneurial journey. There were speaking invitations from conferences I tried to get into as an attendee 3 years ago. There were even a couple of literary agents, actual literary agents, asking if I'd ever considered writing a book about building a successful startup, because apparently everyone with a success story now needed to write a book about it. But the absolute best part, the cherry on top of this absurd sundae of sudden popularity, was watching people from my past materialize out of the digital void like ghosts who'd suddenly remembered they were supposed to be haunting me. Brad from my freshman year dorm, who I was pretty sure had stolen my microwave and definitely never paid me back the $40 he borrowed for pizza, sent me a LinkedIn message. Hey man, long time. Saw the news about your company. So proud of you, bro. We should catch up sometime. I've got a startup idea I'd love to run by you. Of course he did. Of course Brad, who once told me that my major in computer science was basically a degree in being boring, now had a startup idea he wanted to discuss. I wondered if it involved stolen microwaves and unpaid debts, because that seemed to be his area of expertise. Then there was Jessica Martinez from high school, who I'd had a massive crush on junior year, and who'd friend-zoned me so hard I was pretty sure I'd left a crater. She sent me a Facebook friend request, Facebook, like we were living in 2010, with a message that said, OMG Daniel, just saw you on the news. I always knew you'd do something amazing. We should grab coffee and catch up. I'm actually single now, just FYI. Winking face. I stared at that winky face emoji for a solid 30 seconds, trying to decide if I was more amused or horrified. Jessica, who'd once told me I was really sweet but not her type, was now sliding into my DMs with relationship status updates and coffee suggestions. The same Jessica who'd gone to prom with Derek Matthews, The quarterback who called me computer nerd like it was my legal first name. That Jessica suddenly thought I'd done something amazing and wanted to catch up over coffee. Just FYI, I muttered to my phone screen. I was the same person last week when I was worth less money. Funny how that works. My Twitter, or X, or whatever we were calling it this week, had gone absolutely bananas. I barely used the platform, usually just lurking and occasionally retweeting something about software development or making a joke about debugging code. My follower count had been sitting at a comfortable 352 people, mostly other developers and tech enthusiasts who appreciated my occasional thoughts on database architecture. Now, I had over 15,000 followers and climbing. People were quote tweeting the news articles about the acquisition with comments like, "This guy is the future of tech," and "Local hero makes it big," and my personal favorite, "Who is this guy and why am I just hearing about him?" Some local influencer with 200,000 followers had posted about me with the caption, "This man just sold his company for $320 million and you've never heard of him. That's how you move in silence. Respect." 100 points. The post had 12,000 likes and 3,000 retweets. I was being held up as an example of humble success by someone who posted daily selfies and product sponsorships for detox teas. The irony was not lost on me. Instagram was its own special disaster. I had maybe 100 followers there, mostly friends and family, and that one cousin who posted way too many pictures of her breakfast. Now my follower count was approaching 5,000, and my last post, a photo of Alex and me at the office from 6 months ago with the caption, "Just another Monday," had 700 comments. People were analyzing this completely ordinary photo like it was the Mona Lisa. "Look at that determination in his eyes," one comment read. My eyes in that photo were mostly showing, "I need more coffee and a nap," but sure, determination worked too. Even my mother had texted me, which was saying something because my mother still called the internet the Google and thought Instagram was a type of Telegram. "Your aunt forwarded me an article about you," her message read. "Why didn't you tell us you were selling your company? Dad wants to know if you need help with your taxes. Call me." My mother wanted to know why I hadn't told her I was selling the company. My mother, who I tried to explain Datastride to at least 15 times over the years, who always smiled and nodded, and then asked if I was still doing the computer thing. Now she wanted to know why I hadn't kept her informed about major business decisions. The same woman who thought the cloud was exclusively for weather. Kenneth's text was still sitting in my messages, unresponded to and growing more pathetic by the minute. He'd followed it up with another message. "Seriously, man, let's connect. I've got some clients at my firm who would be interested in what you're doing. Could be mutually beneficial. Give me a call when you get a chance." Kenneth wanted to connect me with his clients. Kenneth, who worked at his father-in-law's real estate company in what I was 90% sure was a fake job created to keep him employed, wanted to help me with business opportunities. Kenneth, who'd spent the last 5 years treating me like I was furniture at family gatherings, present but not worth acknowledging, now wanted to facilitate introductions and create mutually beneficial situations. I took a screenshot of his messages and sent them to Alex with the caption, "Kenny Boy wants to network." Alex responded immediately, "Ha ha ha. Is this the same Kenneth who asked if you were Clara's charity case last Christmas?" "The very same," I typed back. "Beautiful. Just beautiful. Please tell me you're not going to respond." "Oh, I'm definitely not responding. I'm going to let him marinate in that message. Maybe respond in like 6 months with 'Sorry, just saw this.'" Alex sent back a series of crying laughing emojis. My phone buzzed again. This time it was a number I didn't recognize with a 212 area code. New York. I answered, mostly because I was curious and also because at this point, what was one more random call in the chaos? "Is this Daniel Morrison?" a smooth, professional voice asked. "That depends on who's asking and whether you're trying to sell me something," I replied. The voice laughed. "Mr. Morrison, my name is David Chun. I'm a producer for Business Today with Marcus Reed. We'd love to have you on the show next week to discuss your acquisition and your journey building Datastride. Are you familiar with our program?" Was I familiar with Business Today? It was only one of the biggest business shows on cable, the kind of show where CEOs and entrepreneurs got grilled by Marcus Reed, who had a reputation for asking the questions that made publicists nervous and executives sweat. I'd watched it dozens of times, usually while eating dinner and thinking, man, those people have really made it. "Yeah, I know the show," I said, trying to sound casual instead of internally screaming. Excellent. We typically record on Tuesdays at our Manhattan studio, but we could arrange a remote setup if traveling isn't convenient for you. Marcus is very interested in your story. You've managed to build a highly successful company while maintaining an unusually low profile, which is rare in today's tech landscape. I looked around my living room at the Chinese food containers, my sweatpants, my entire current situation that screamed low profile, mostly because I'd been too busy actually building something to worry about building a brand. Remote would probably work better, I said. I'm not exactly prepared for a New York trip this week. Perfect. I'll have my assistant reach out with scheduling details. This is going to be a great segment, Mr. Morrison. Congratulations on your success. After I hung up, I just sat there for a minute, staring at my phone like it had transformed into an alien device. Business Today wanted me on their show. Marcus Reed wanted to interview me. People who'd ignored me for years were suddenly desperate to connect. My LinkedIn was exploding. My social media was blowing up. And somewhere across town, my wife and her family were probably still trying to figure out how the boring computer guy had become the most interesting person they'd accidentally excluded from their party. I opened my laptop and checked Twitter one more time. Someone had created a meme using my LinkedIn headshot with the caption, POV, you're about to find out your nobody brother-in-law is worth $320 million. It had 40,000 likes. I retweeted it with the comment, POV, you're eating Chinese food in sweatpants while watching yourself become a meme. The retweet got 15,000 likes in 10 minutes. This is insane, I said to my empty apartment. This is absolutely insane. My phone buzzed again. Another LinkedIn request. Another email. Another person who suddenly remembered we were old friends. I closed my laptop, picked up my remaining egg roll, and smiled. In 3 hours, I'd be on Channel 7's Late Show. Next week, I'd be on Business Today. And tomorrow, I'd probably still be dealing with the fallout from the best timed, I told you I wasn't invited moment in the history of family drama. But right now I was just a guy in sweatpants, eating Chinese food, watching the internet lose its collective mind over someone they'd never heard of 24 hours ago. And honestly, it was pretty damn entertaining. That night, while I was busy showering off the remnants of Chinese food and trying to find something to wear that made me look like a successful entrepreneur instead of a guy who'd been living in sweatpants for the past 4 hours, Patricia's carefully curated birthday party was apparently transforming from an elegant celebration into a full-blown social crisis that would be talked about in their circles for years to come. I learned about all of this later through a combination of social media stalking, texts from Alex, who was monitoring the situation like it was the Super Bowl, and eventually from Clara herself, though those details came much later and with significantly more crying. The party had started out exactly as planned. According to the 17 Instagram stories I watched later with the kind of satisfaction usually reserved for watching your favorite sports team crush their rivals. Patricia's living room looked like something out of Architectural Digest, all tasteful flower arrangements and ambient lighting that probably cost more to set up than most people's monthly rent. The champagne was flowing. The hors d'oeuvres were being served on those ridiculous tiny plates that rich people love for some reason, and everyone was dressed in cocktail attire that screamed, I have money and I want you to know it without me having to say it directly. Kenneth was there with his Instagram influencer girlfriend, a 26-year-old named Brittany, who kept stopping mid-conversation to take selfies and check her engagement metrics. She'd posted about 3 stories already, all hashtagged with things like hashtag blessed and hashtag luxury lifestyle and hashtag birthday celebration, because apparently existing at a party now required constant documentation and strategic hashtag usage. In one of her stories, you could see Kenneth in the background, puffing out his chest and talking to some older guy in an expensive suit, probably trying to look important and successful by association. Clara's Aunt Susan was indeed holding court near the fireplace, regaling a small crowd with her Amalfi Coast stories that everyone had heard a minimum of 4 times. She was wearing what appeared to be approximately $75,000 worth of jewelry and a dress that probably cost more than a used car. Her husband, Uncle Martin, was nursing a scotch and nodding along with the glazed expression of a man who'd heard these stories so many times he could recite them in his sleep. Patricia herself was the center of attention, as intended, wearing a cream-colored designer dress that Clara had mentioned cost only $3,000 on sale, which was apparently a bargain in their world. She was laughing with her country club friends, accepting compliments about the party, the decorations, her dress, her hair, all the standard birthday worship that comes with turning 60 when you're wealthy and well-connected. Richard was schmoozing with his business partners, discussing market trends and investment opportunities in that particular tone that men of a certain tax bracket use when they're trying to sound smart about money. Everything was perfect. Everything was exactly as Patricia had planned. And then, at approximately 6:05 p.m., someone's phone buzzed with a news alert. According to Alex, who'd gotten the play-by-play from someone who'd gotten it from someone else, it was Patricia's friend Diane who first saw the notification. Diane, the same woman who'd once asked me if I'd ever considered getting a real job, while looking at me like I was a servant who'd wandered into the wrong room. She'd glanced at her phone, frowned, and then her eyes had gone comically wide. She'd apparently grabbed her husband's arm and whispered something urgently, and he'd pulled out his own phone to confirm. Within 3 minutes, half the party was checking their phones. Within 5 minutes, someone had turned on the giant TV in Patricia's living room, the 75-inch monstrosity that Richard had bought last year and Patricia had complained about because it was too large and too obvious, and switched it to the local business news channel. And there I was, my face, bigger than life, hovering on that screen behind Patricia's elaborate 3-tiered birthday cake with its fondant flowers and gold leaf decorations. The headline scrolling beneath my headshot. Local entrepreneur sells company for $320 million. My name in official news font. Stock footage of the DataStride office. A brief interview clip with Margaret Reeves talking about innovative solutions and impressive growth trajectory. The party, from what I gathered, came to a screeching halt. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Champagne glasses froze mid-toast. Someone dropped a tiny quiche on Patricia's cream-colored carpet, leaving what I imagined was a very expensive stain that would require professional cleaning and several rounds of guilt-tripping whoever was responsible. Patricia had apparently just been cutting into her birthday cake when the news came on. There's a photo that Brittany posted to Instagram and then quickly deleted, but not before Alex screenshot it and sent it to me. In the photo, Patricia is holding a cake knife, mouth open in what can only be described as shock, while my face beams down from the TV screen behind her like some kind of corporate guardian angel. Clara is visible in the corner of the frame, staring at her phone with an expression that looks like she's just watched her entire worldview collapse in real time. Kenneth is mid-sip of champagne, frozen like a confused statue. The caption Brittany had written before deleting it. When the birthday surprise is a surprise, face screaming in fear birthday cake, hashtag plot twist, hashtag unexpected, hashtag family drama. That hashtag family drama was probably what made her delete it. Or maybe Clara had demanded she take it down. Either way, the screenshot existed forever now, immortalized in Alex's photo library and my own personal collection of moments I wish I could have witnessed in person. The guests, these important people who mattered so much, had immediately started asking questions. Diane had apparently been the first to vocalize what everyone was thinking. Isn't that Clara's husband? The one who works with computers? Patricia, to her credit, had tried to maintain composure. Yes, that's Daniel, she'd said. According to multiple reports, her voice tight and controlled in that way that meant she was absolutely losing it internally, but refused to show it externally. He runs a tech company. Data something. DataStride Analytics, someone had supplied helpfully, probably reading off their phone. Says here he co-founded it 8 years ago. Provides data processing solutions to mid-sized businesses. Over 300 clients across North America and Europe. $320 million, another voice had added, because apparently the number needed to be said out loud to be believed. TechVenture Global bought the whole company. Richard had jumped in then, trying to save face, doing damage control like his life depended on it. Yes, we've been following Daniel's progress very closely. Very proud of him. Very proud. He's been working on this deal for months. Brilliant young man. Absolutely brilliant. This was the same Richard who'd introduced me to his golf buddies last summer as Clara's husband. Does something with websites, I think. But sure, they'd been following my progress very closely. They'd been so invested in my success that they'd literally uninvited me from this party 3 days ago. Kenneth, never one to miss an opportunity for self-promotion, had apparently started working the room immediately. Yeah, my brother-in-law Daniel, absolute genius. He'd been overheard saying to anyone who would listen, "We're actually really close. Talk business all the time." I've been advising him on some strategic moves. Really proud to have him in the family. This was Kenneth's version of reality. In actual reality, Kenneth once asked me to fix his laptop because his internet was broken, which turned out to mean he'd accidentally turned off his Wi-Fi and didn't know how to turn it back on. That was the extent of our business relationship, me explaining how to click a button while he nodded like I was teaching him advanced physics. The investors at the party, the ones who'd been invited because they were important and connected and wealthy, had immediately started asking how to get in touch with me. Did I have a card? Was I taking meetings? What were my plans post-acquisition? Was I looking at new ventures? Would I be interested in angel investing? These were people who wouldn't have given me the time of day if I'd been standing right there in the room. But suddenly my contact information was the most valuable commodity at the party. Patricia's friend Marjorie, who I remembered from countless dinner parties as the woman who talked exclusively about her son's career as a corporate lawyer and her daughter's marriage to a doctor, had apparently cornered Clara and said, "You must be so proud of Daniel. What an accomplishment. Patricia, you must be thrilled to have such a successful son-in-law." The look on Patricia's face in that moment, according to witnesses, was priceless. She was thrilled, sure, but also furious, confused, embarrassed, and trying desperately to figure out how to spin this situation into something that didn't make her look like she'd massively underestimated her own son-in-law. "Of course we're thrilled," she'd managed to say. "We always knew Daniel had potential. We're just surprised by the timing of the announcement." The timing. The beautiful, perfect, absolutely magnificent timing of the announcement happening right in the middle of the party I'd been told not to attend. The party where I didn't fit the crowd. The party full of important people who were now very, very interested in the unimportant person who wasn't there. Clara had excused herself to call me, which is when I'd had my delightful conversation with her while eating Chinese food. While she was on the phone, pleading with me to come save her from this social disaster, the party had continued to devolve into chaos. People were Googling me, reading articles about DataStride, pulling up my LinkedIn profile, trying to figure out how they'd missed the fact that Patricia's son-in-law was apparently a tech success story. Even the catering staff had gotten in on the action. One of the servers, a college kid named Marcus who was working the party to pay for textbooks, had apparently recognized me from the news and pulled out his phone to follow me on LinkedIn during his break. He posted about it on TikTok later. POV. You're serving champagne at a rich people party and you realize the son-in-law they didn't invite is richer than everyone in the room combined. The video got 200,000 views and 17,000 comments about karma and justice and how rich people were the worst. The party limped along for another hour or so, but the damage was done. The elegant celebration of Patricia's 60th birthday had become the party where everyone found out that the family had massively screwed up by excluding the one person who actually had something impressive to talk about. Every conversation kept circling back to me, to DataStride, to the acquisition, to where I was and why I wasn't there and how nobody had known about this. The photos that made it to social media were incredible. Someone posted a picture of the TV screen showing my face with the caption, "Best party guest." Another showed Patricia standing in front of the TV, my headshot visible over her shoulder, with the caption, "Photo Bomb of the Year." Brittany had posted and deleted at least 6 stories, each one trying to make the situation look less awkward and failing spectacularly. By the time I was in the car heading to Channel 7 for my interview, the internet had already decided that Patricia's birthday party was the funniest thing to happen in local social circles in years. There were memes. There were TikToks. There were Reddit threads analyzing the social dynamics of rich people accidentally excluding the one person worth excluding them for. And I hadn't even made it to the TV studio yet. By Sunday morning, my phone looked less like a communication device and more like a hostage situation. I had 63 missed calls, most of them from numbers I recognized, but had zero interest in talking to. Clara had left a dozen voicemails that I'd listened to exactly once before deciding that was enough emotional whiplash for one weekend. The messages were a roller coaster of emotions that would have impressed a therapist and concerned a hostage negotiator. The first few were angry. Really angry. "Why didn't you tell me?" she demanded, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. Do you have any idea how embarrassing this was? Everyone kept asking me questions I couldn't answer. Questions about my own husband's company. I look like an idiot, Daniel. A complete idiot in front of everyone who matters. I'd almost laughed at that part. Everyone who matters. Not everyone I care about, or my family and friends. No, everyone who matters, like people were ranked by their net worth and social connections instead of, being actual human beings worthy of basic respect. The middle voicemails shifted to desperate. Please call me back. We need to talk about this. Mom won't stop calling. Dad keeps asking why you didn't tell him about the company. Kenneth is being insufferable, acting like you two are best friends. Please, just call me back so we can figure this out. Figure it out. Like this was a problem to be solved rather than a consequence of her own actions. Like we could just have a conversation and somehow rewrite the part where she told me I wasn't good enough for her mother's birthday party. The last few voicemails were the worst, though. Those were the ones where she cried. Real crying. Not the performative kind she used when she wanted sympathy or was trying to manipulate a situation. I messed up, she'd sobbed into my voicemail at 2 in the morning. I know I messed up. I was wrong. I cared too much about what other people thought and not enough about you. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Please just talk to me. Part of me felt bad listening to that. The part that had married her 5 years ago. The part that remembered when things were simpler and we actually talked to each other instead of just existing in parallel universes. But the other part, the bigger part, remembered standing in our kitchen 3 days ago holding expensive wine and being told I didn't fit the crowd. That part wasn't ready to feel bad yet. Patricia had texted me too, which was somehow even more surreal than Clara's voicemails. My mother-in-law, who communicated with me exclusively through Clara or not at all, had actually typed out a message to me directly. It was a masterpiece of passive-aggressive politeness wrapped in a bow of fake sincerity. Daniel, I hope this message finds you well. I wanted to reach out personally to express how thrilled Richard and I are about your tremendous success with DataStride Analytics. We've always believed in your potential and are so proud to have you as part of our family. The party on Friday was lovely, though we were disappointed you couldn't join us. I understand you had prior commitments, which is completely understandable given your busy schedule. We would love to have you over for a family dinner next week so we can celebrate your achievement properly. Perhaps Thursday evening? We're thinking of inviting a few close friends who would love to meet you and hear about your work. Let me know what works for your schedule. With love, Patricia. I'd read that message 3 times, each time finding new layers of audacity. We've always believed in your potential. That was my favorite lie. Patricia had always believed I was acceptable furniture in her daughter's life, something to be tolerated but not celebrated. And that last part about inviting a few close friends who would love to meet you was just Patricia speak for, I want to show you off to my social circle now that you're worth something. I'd replied with a single sentence. Thanks for the kind words, Patricia. Unfortunately, my schedule is pretty packed for the foreseeable future. I'll let you know if that changes. Polite. Professional. Absolutely dripping with the subtext of nice try, but I'm not your show pony. Richard had texted separately, trying a different approach. Son, we should talk about your next steps. I have experience with major financial transitions and would be happy to offer guidance. Also have some investment opportunities that might interest you. Call me when you get a chance. Son, investment opportunities. Guidance. This was the same man who'd once told me that computer jobs were unstable and I should consider getting into real estate like Kenneth. Now he wanted to offer me financial guidance and investment opportunities. The irony was so thick I could have spread it on toast. Kenneth's messages were their own special category of desperate networking. He'd sent 14 texts over the weekend, each one more transparent than the last. Bro, we need to connect. Seriously, got some major opportunities to discuss. My firm's clients are asking about you. Let's grab lunch this week. On me, obviously, huh? That last one made me laugh out loud. Kenneth offering to pay for lunch like that was some grand gesture. Like his middle management salary could somehow impress someone who'd just sold a company for 9 figures. I'd responded to exactly none of them, which I knew was driving him crazy. Kenneth was the type who needed validation, needed responses, needed to feel important and connected. Radio silence was probably killing him. But the message that really got me, the one I kept coming back to and reading over and over, was from Alex. He'd sent it Saturday night after watching my Channel 7 interview, which had apparently gone viral in local business circles. You handled that perfectly, man. Classy, funny, didn't trash anyone, but made your point crystal clear. Your in-laws are going to be dealing with the fallout from this for months. It's beautiful. Also, we should probably talk about what's next for us. This is just the beginning, brother. We've got options now. Real options. But first, enjoy watching them squirm. You've earned it. Alex got it. He understood that this wasn't about revenge or being petty or rubbing my success in anyone's face. It was about finally being seen, finally being valued, but only after proving I was worth valuing. And yeah, maybe there was some satisfaction in watching the people who dismissed me scramble to get my attention now. Maybe. That made me petty. But honestly, I was okay with that. I looked at my phone, at all those unanswered calls and unread texts and desperate messages from people who wanted something from me now that I had something worth wanting. And I smiled. Not a mean smile, not exactly. Just the smile of someone who'd finally figured out that being underestimated wasn't actually the worst position to be in. Sometimes the best revenge is just living well and letting people sit with their own garbage. A week later, Clara came home early from work, which was unusual because she typically stayed late to avoid traffic and also to avoid me, if we're being honest. She looked exhausted in a way that went beyond just physical tiredness. Her makeup was smudged, her hair wasn't in its usual perfect state, and she was wearing flats instead of heels, which for Clara was basically the equivalent of waving a white flag. She found me on the couch, laptop open, responding to yet another interview request. I looked up, said nothing, and waited. The ball was firmly in her court. I messed up, she said quietly, standing in the doorway like she was afraid to come closer. I cared too much about appearances, about what my family thought, about impressing people who don't actually matter. I leaned back, closing my laptop. Really? I thought you cared about networking and maintaining the right connections. She winced. You're impossible. Actually, I said with a slight grin, I'm unavailable to shallow people. A small smile cracked through her exhausted expression. So do you still want to be with me? The question hung in the air, vulnerable and real in a way Clara hadn't been in years. Depends, I replied. Will your mother let me attend Christmas dinner, or do I have to buy the broadcast rights first? She laughed, actually laughed, and it was awkward but genuine. She sat down next to me, keeping some distance, but at least being in the same room. I don't expect you to forgive me immediately. I just wanted you to know that I see it now. I see what I did. That's a start, I said. We sat there in silence, not quite comfortable, but not hostile either. Sometimes humor is the only glue left when everything else has broken. Months later, life looked dramatically different, like someone had taken my old existence and run it through an upgrade program I didn't know existed. I'd moved into a new place downtown, one of those modern condos with floor-to-ceiling windows and a view that made you feel like you were living in a movie about successful people. It was quiet, sleek, peaceful, everything my old life with Clara's constant family drama wasn't. The place even had a home office where I could work without hearing Patricia's voice echoing through my nightmares about not fitting the right crowds. Clara and I were on talking terms, which was progress considering where we'd started. We met for coffee every couple of weeks. Awkward but genuine conversations where we tried to figure out if there was anything left worth saving. She'd started therapy, which I respected. I'd started saying no to things I didn't want to do, which she was learning to respect. We weren't back together, weren't even close to figuring out what together would look like now, but we were communicating like actual adults instead of strangers who happened to share a last name. I launched a mentorship program for young entrepreneurs, something I'd been thinking about for years, but never had the time or resources to actually do. Every other week, I met with scrappy startup founders working out of their apartments and coffee shops, people who reminded me of Alex and me 8 years ago when we were surviving on ramen and refusing to quit. I gave them advice, made introductions, and occasionally invested in their companies when I believed in what they were building. It felt good, using the success for something beyond just having a bigger bank account. The speaking engagements became routine. Tech conferences, university business programs, entrepreneurship summits. Everyone wanted to hear the story of the guy who built a $300 million company while flying completely under the radar. My go-to opening line became, remember, if your spouse tells you not to show up somewhere, show up on the news instead. It always got laughs, sometimes uncomfortable ones from people who definitely uninvited someone from something important. Patricia watched every interview now, sending me text messages with smiley emojis like we'd been best friends all along. She invited me to every family gathering, always mentioning which important people would be there, always making sure I knew I was welcome. I went to some, skipped others, and never felt obligated either way. Richard had stopped offering investment advice after I politely declined 3 times. Kenneth still tried to network occasionally, but with less desperation and more genuine curiosity about what I was actually doing. And whenever someone brought up that birthday party, that legendary 60th birthday celebration that had become local social folklore, I just grinned and delivered my favorite line. Ah yes, the night I became too rich to embarrass anyone. The irony never got old. Neither did the satisfaction of knowing that sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's just living well and letting karma handle the rest. I was finally living on my own terms, and that was worth more than any acquisition deal. I asked when the wedding is, and my daughter said, "I got married yesterday. You aren't invited, it's just for special people." A week later she called. "Did you transfer it?" I replied, "Didn't I tell you?" So there I was, standing in my living room like some kind of condemned man waiting for the executioner, staring at my phone like it was about to explode in my hand. My wife Clara was doing that thing she does where she pretends she's not listening, while simultaneously listening so hard I'm surprised her ears weren't literally growing bigger. She was over by the window with that dusty watering can we've had since the Clinton administration, giving attention to a plant that I'm 90% sure is plastic, and the performance was about as subtle as a freight train crashing through a library. I could feel her eyes boring into the side of my head every 3 seconds, waiting for me to make the call that had been hanging over us like a dark cloud for the past week. I'd been rehearsing this conversation in my head for days now, running through different scenarios like some kind of deranged method actor preparing for the role of dad who actually wants to know when his daughter's getting married. I'd practiced the casual tone, the supportive but not too pushy inflection, the perfectly calibrated level of enthusiasm that wouldn't make me sound desperate but also wouldn't make me sound like I didn't care. The same kind of nerves I had back when I was 22 and walked into Henderson's auto shop for my first real job interview, sweating through my only button-down shirt and praying I wouldn't say something stupid like, "I've always been passionate about cars and stuff." Spoiler alert, I definitely said exactly that, and somehow still got the job, which either says something about my charm or the desperately low standards of 1970s automotive retail. I hit the call button before I could chicken out for the 15th time that morning. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times, and with each ring my stomach did another impressive gymnastics routine that would have scored at least a 7.5 from the Russian judge. Clara had now completely abandoned all pretense of watering the fake plant and was just standing there, watering can frozen in midair like a statue in the world's most anxious garden center. On the 4th ring, Leah picked up, and I could hear that particular tone in her voice right away, the one that told me this conversation was already going to be about as pleasant as a root canal performed by a drunk dentist with a grudge. "Hey, sweetheart," I started, going for warm and casual, but probably landing somewhere closer to hostage reading a ransom note. My throat felt like I'd swallowed a handful of sand from the driveway. "So, I've been meaning to ask you, and your mother and I were just wondering, about the wedding and everything. When exactly is the big day? We want to make sure we've got everything sorted out, with my work schedule, and Clara wanted to get her hair done, and I need to pick up that lavender tie from the dry cleaners, the one I bought specifically for this occasion. Remember I told you about it?" I was rambling. I knew I was rambling. I sounded like a telemarketer who'd lost his script and was just hoping enthusiasm could carry him through to the sale. There was a pause on the other end of the line. One of those loaded silences that lasts approximately 2 seconds but feels like you've aged several years waiting for the other shoe to drop. I could practically hear Leah rolling her eyes through the phone, that particular cosmic frequency that all daughters emit when they're about to say something that's going to ruin your entire week. Then her voice came through, sharp and clear and dripping with the kind of smugness usually reserved for people who just won an argument on the internet against someone who can't spell. "Oh," she said, with this little laugh that made my blood pressure immediately spike into the danger zone. "We got married yesterday. It was just a small thing, really intimate, just for special people. I'm going to be honest with you. I've been called a lot of things in my 63 years on this planet. I've been called boring by my college roommate who thought my idea of a wild Friday night being a deck of cards and some reasonably priced beer was somehow a character flaw. I've been called stingy by my brother-in-law who never met an open wallet he didn't want to reach into. I've been called allergic to fashion by literally everyone who's ever seen me in cargo shorts, which I maintain are practical and comfortable, and I don't care what the fashion police have to say about it. But never, not once in my entire life, had I been called not special enough to attend my own daughter's wedding. Not special enough to watch the little girl I taught to ride a bike walk down the aisle. Not special enough to be there for one of the most important days of her life, despite the fact that I'd been there for literally every other day of her life since the moment she came screaming into this world at St. Mary's Hospital weighing 7 pounds and 3 ounces. I just stood there like an idiot, phone pressed to my ear, staring at the half-painted accent wall behind the couch that I'd been meaning to finish for the past 3 months, wondering if this was real life or if I'd somehow slipped into an alternate dimension where up is down and daughters don't invite their fathers to their weddings. The paint job suddenly seemed like a very good metaphor for my relationship with Leah, half-finished and kind of a mess, and probably never going to get completed at this point. My brain was doing that thing where it completely short-circuits and you can't form words. You just make this kind of static noise like a radio stuck between stations. Clara's eyes went wider than I've ever seen them, and this is a woman who once watched me accidentally set the garage on fire trying to deep fry a turkey, so that's saying something. The watering can finally dropped from her hand, hitting the hardwood floor with a thud that seemed way too loud in the sudden, terrible silence of our living room. "What did she say?" she asked, her voice climbing up into that register that meant she was about 5 seconds away from either crying or committing a felony, possibly both. I cleared my throat, trying to find my voice somewhere in the wreckage of my dignity. "She said I'm not special enough to attend my own daughter's wedding," I replied, and hearing the words out loud somehow made it even worse, like saying it gave it more power, made it more real. Apparently the years I spent paying her rent while she found herself don't count as VIP treatment. Neither does the time I bought what she called essential business equipment for Travis's cryptocurrency venture that I'm pretty sure was just an elaborate scheme to buy a really expensive gaming computer, or the student loans I helped with, or the car insurance I covered, or the emergency dental work, or the security deposit on 3 different apartments because she kept deciding she didn't like the vibes of various neighborhoods. Clara just stood there shaking her head, and I could see her mentally calculating the same numbers I'd been trying not to think about for the past 3 years. "What kind of person does that?" she whispered. But it wasn't really a question, more like she was just saying words to fill the horrible silence that had settled over us like a fog made of disappointment and broken expectations. That night, I couldn't sleep, which wasn't exactly unusual lately, but this was different. I sat in my recliner in the dark, the one I'd bought on sale at that furniture warehouse place after my back started acting up, staring at the lavender tie hanging on the coat rack by the door. I'd bought it specifically for the wedding, spent an embarrassing amount of time at Men's Warehouse trying to find the perfect shade that would complement whatever color scheme Leah had chosen, which she'd mentioned exactly once in a phone call 3 months ago, and I'd written down on a post-it note like it was the nuclear launch codes. I'd even practiced smiling in the bathroom mirror while wearing it, trying to look like the proud father of the bride instead of a guy who looked vaguely constipated and uncomfortable in formal wear. Now the tie just hung there mocking me, a lavender-colored symbol of my complete and utter failure as a father, or at least that's what it felt like at 2:30 in the morning when everything feels worse and your brain won't shut up. I'd been rehearsing for a role that got canceled without anyone bothering to tell me the show was off. I was the understudy who showed up ready to perform only to find out the theater had been demolished and everyone had gone home. All those years of parenting, of trying to be supportive and present and financially generous to a fault, and I couldn't even make the guest list for the main event. Somewhere in the distance a dog was barking, and I thought about how even that dog probably had more people who considered it special than I apparently did. The thought was so ridiculous and self-pitying that I almost laughed, but it came out more like a sad little exhale that fogged up my reading glasses. The next morning, I woke up feeling like I'd been hit by a garbage truck driven by my own disappointment, which is a very specific kind of terrible that I don't recommend to anyone. My back hurt from falling asleep in the recliner at some ungodly hour. My neck was stiff from the angle I'd been slouched at, and my phone was buzzing on the coffee table like an angry wasp that had somehow learned to use technology. I reached for it with all the enthusiasm of a man reaching for a live grenade, squinting at the screen through eyes that felt like they'd been replaced with sandpaper sometime during the night. Clara was already up. I could hear her in the kitchen doing that thing where she aggressively makes coffee when she's upset, slamming cabinet doors and clattering mugs around, like she's performing in a percussion ensemble dedicated to expressing maternal rage. I unlocked my phone and there it was, right at the top of my Facebook feed, because of course the universe has a sixth sense of timing and algorithms apparently run on pure malicious intent. A photo album titled Our Special Day, with about 47 pictures, each one more painful than the last, like someone had designed a slideshow specifically to cause maximum emotional damage to fathers who apparently didn't make the cut. Leah stood there in her wedding gown, the same dress she'd called me about 8 months ago, sobbing about how she absolutely needed it, and how it was her dream dress, and how if she didn't get this specific dress from this specific boutique her entire life would be ruined forever. The dress that cost more than my first car, the one she told me was essential for her mental health and sense of self-worth, the one I paid for under the creative accounting category of student loan stress relief, because apparently that's what we're calling wedding expenses these days when you don't want to admit you're bleeding your father dry. She looked beautiful, I'll give her that, even through my haze of betrayal and sleep deprivation. The dress fit perfectly, all that lace and beading and whatever else they put on wedding dresses that makes them cost as much as a decent used sedan. Her hair was done up in one of those complicated arrangements that probably required an engineering degree to accomplish, and her makeup was flawless in that way that makes people look like they're glowing from within, which I'm pretty sure is just expensive highlighter, but what do I know about cosmetics? Next to her stood Travis, her new husband, grinning like he'd just won the lottery without having to buy a ticket, which I guess in a way he had since he'd married into the bank of dad, without having to pass a credit check or show proof of employment beyond his consulting business that, as far as I could tell, consisted of posting motivational quotes on LinkedIn. They looked like they'd been pulled straight out of a toothpaste commercial, all gleaming white smiles and perfect posture and the kind of happiness that makes you want to either congratulate them or check them for performance-enhancing drugs. Behind them in various shots stood Travis's parents, Bob and Diane, who I'd met exactly twice, and who had looked at me both times like I was something stuck to the bottom of their designer shoes. They were in multiple photos looking proud and proper and like they'd just adopted royalty into their family bloodline, which apparently now included my daughter, who was too good to invite her own father, but not too good to spend his money on creating this picture-perfect fantasy wedding that I was now viewing through a screen like some kind of digital ghost haunting the event I should have been attending. And me? Where was I in these photos? Nowhere. That's where. I was conspicuously absent from every single shot, erased from the narrative like a character cut from the final edit of a movie. I looked at my own involvement in this whole production and realized I was basically like one of those anonymous financial donors whose names appear in the tiny print at the end of museum plaques that nobody reads. This wedding was made possible in part by a grant from the Foundation of Gullible Fathers Who Don't Know When to Stop Writing Checks, with additional funding provided by retirement savings that could have been a boat. I scrolled through the entire album with the kind of morbid fascination usually reserved for watching car crashes or reality TV shows about hoarders. There were photos of the ceremony, the reception, the cake cutting, the first dance, all these traditional wedding moments that I'd assumed I'd be part of because, you know, I'm her father, and that's generally how these things work in most functional families. There was even a photo of Travis's dad giving a toast, raising his glass with this big emotional smile, probably talking about how proud he was and how happy they were to welcome Leah into their family. And I thought about how I should have been the one doing that. I should have been the one standing up there embarrassing my daughter with dad jokes and getting a little teary-eyed and reminiscing about teaching her to ride a bike and watching her graduate high school. I sat there on my couch staring at these photos, muttering to myself like a crazy person, "Oh look, special people having a special time with my not-so-special money." The irony was so thick you could cut it with the cake knife they were using in photo number 17. Every flower arrangement I saw, I mentally calculated the cost. Every centerpiece, every chair cover, every string of those trendy Edison bulbs hanging in the background. I could practically see the dollar signs floating above them like some kind of depressing augmented reality app designed to show you exactly how much your own child's betrayal cost you down to the penny. Clara appeared in the doorway with 2 mugs of coffee, took one look at my face, and immediately knew what I was looking at. She has this sixth sense about these things, probably developed over 40 years of marriage to a man whose face apparently broadcasts his emotions in high definition. "You should comment something nice," she said, sitting down next to me and handing me one of the mugs, which I accepted even though my hands were shaking slightly, and I was pretty sure adding caffeine to my current emotional state was like throwing gasoline on a dumpster fire. "Oh, I will," I said, and my fingers were already moving across the screen before my brain could catch up with what a monumentally bad idea this was. I typed out, "Congratulations. I see my credit card finally got to walk you down the aisle since I didn't. So proud of my Visa for this special moment. Really beautiful ceremony. Wish I could have been there, but I understand that Discover and MasterCard probably took up all the good seats." I stared at the comment for a good 30 seconds, my thumb hovering over the post button like a nuclear launch officer contemplating starting World War III. The petty part of me, which I'm discovering is a much larger part than I previously thought, desperately wanted to hit that button. Wanted to see that comment appear under those perfect photos. Wanted to watch the awkward questions from relatives who didn't know I hadn't been invited. Wanted to create even a fraction of the discomfort I was currently experiencing. But then the part of me that still functions like a rational adult human being, the part that Clara was currently staring at with those eyes that mean, "Don't you dare," made me highlight the whole thing and delete it character by character. Even my sarcasm has limits, apparently, though I'm learning those limits are a lot further out than I thought they were. I settled for just liking the post, which felt like the social media equivalent of saying, "I acknowledge that this thing happened even though you deliberately excluded me from it. And I'm going to be the bigger person here, even though it's killing me inside." Then I put my phone face down on the coffee table, picked up my coffee mug, and took a long drink of something that tasted like bitterness and regret with a hint of French roast. Clara patted my knee in that way that meant she was proud of me for not starting a public social media war. But we both knew that this whole situation was far from over, and that eventually something was going to give, because you can only push a man so far before he stops being civilized and starts being honest. A week crawled by like a wounded animal dragging itself across hot pavement, each day blending into the next in a blur of me pretending I was fine and Clara pretending she believed me. I'd been going through the motions of normal life, showing up at the hardware store where I work part-time because retirement turned out to be boring as hell and I needed something to do besides stare at walls and contemplate my failures as a parent. I'd been helping customers find the right size screws and explaining the difference between interior and exterior paint with all the fake enthusiasm I could muster, which wasn't much, but apparently was enough to fool people who just wanted to fix their leaky faucets and didn't care about my emotional state. Then on Tuesday afternoon, right when I was in the middle of reorganizing the electrical section because someone had mixed up the wire gauges and it was driving me insane, my phone started buzzing in my pocket. I pulled it out and saw Leah's name on the screen, and I'm not going to lie, my first instinct was to just let it ring through to voicemail and deal with whatever fresh nightmare she was calling about later when I'd had time to mentally prepare myself. But curiosity is a stubborn thing, like a dog that won't stop barking until you give it attention, and despite every instinct telling me this was going to ruin my day, I swiped to answer. "Dad?" she said, and I could already hear it in her voice. That particular tone she uses when she wants something. The one that starts out sweet like honey but has this desperate edge underneath it like artificial sweetener that leaves a weird aftertaste. It's the same voice she used when she was 16 and wanted to borrow the car, or when she was in college and needed emergency money for textbooks that I later found out meant emergency money for concert tickets. "Dad, hi, how are you? How's Mom? I've been meaning to call. Things have just been so crazy with the move and everything." The move. Right. The move into the apartment that I'd been paying rent on for the past 3 years. The one she apparently was still living in with her new husband, who I'm sure had lots of opinions about interior decorating, but zero opinions about contributing to the actual cost of having a roof over his head. I waited, not saying anything, just letting the silence stretch out between us like taffy because I knew exactly where this was going and I wanted her to have to work for it. So anyway, she continued, and here it came right on schedule. The rent's due tomorrow, and I noticed you forgot to make the transfer this month. I'm sure it just slipped your mind with everything going on. You know how busy you are at the store and everything. So I just wanted to remind you before it's late, and we get hit with fees. I took a deep breath, the kind of breath you take before you jump into cold water or tell your boss exactly what you think of his management style. I was standing in aisle 7 surrounded by circuit breakers and outlet covers, and I had this moment of perfect clarity where I realized I was absolutely done being the ATM that everyone just assumed would keep dispensing cash forever without any kind of appreciation or basic human decency. Didn't I tell you? I said, and my voice came out calmer than I expected, almost pleasant, which somehow made what I was about to say even better. I only help special people now. It's my new policy. Special people only. Very exclusive. The silence on the other end of the line was so satisfying I almost heard her jaw physically drop and hit whatever expensive hardwood floors I'd helped pay to install. I could picture her standing in her kitchen, probably wearing some trendy athleisure outfit that cost more than my entire wardrobe, her phone pressed to her ear, trying to process what I'd just said, because clearly she'd expected me to just roll over and apologize for the inconvenience of not funding her lifestyle on the exact schedule she'd become accustomed to. Dad, she finally said, and now the sweetness was completely gone from her voice, replaced by this sharp edge that could have cut glass. Don't be cruel. This isn't funny. We have bills to pay. You can't just suddenly decide to stop helping us without any warning. Cruel. She called me cruel. The man who'd spent the better part of the last decade making sure she never had to worry about money, who'd covered her rent and her car insurance and her student loans and her mysterious business expenses and her emergency dental work, and probably funded half of Travis's wardrobe of designer sneakers that he wore while not having a real job. That man was being cruel because he finally grew a spine. Cruel? I said, and I could feel this laugh bubbling up from somewhere deep in my chest, the kind of laugh that has absolutely nothing to do with humor and everything to do with the absurdity of the entire situation. Sweetheart, let me tell you about Cruel. Cruel is not inviting your father to your wedding because he's not special enough. Cruel is posting 47 photos of an event I paid for but wasn't allowed to attend. Cruel is calling me only when you need money and pretending it's a real relationship. I was on a roll now, 3 years of bottled-up resentment flowing out of me like water from a burst pipe, and it felt amazing in the way that finally saying what you really think always feels amazing even when you know there's going to be consequences later. I paid your rent for 3 years, Leah. 3 years. That's not cruelty, that's charity. That's me being a walking, talking nonprofit organization dedicated to funding the lifestyle of someone who apparently thinks I'm not worth a seat at her wedding. So here's the thing, and I want you to really hear this because I'm only going to say it once. The Bank of Dad is officially closed. Shuttered. Out of business. We're not even offering those predatory payday loans anymore. You want rent money? Ask your special wedding guests. Ask Travis's parents who looked so proud in all those photos. Ask your husband to get an actual job that pays in real money instead of cryptocurrency dreams and LinkedIn engagement. You can't do this, she said, and now she sounded like she was gearing up for a full meltdown. That quiver in her voice that used to make me cave immediately because I couldn't stand the thought of my daughter being upset. But something had fundamentally changed in me over the past week. Some essential piece of the mechanism that made me an easy mark had finally broken beyond repair. We have a lease. We have responsibilities. You can't just abandon us like this. Watch me, I said, and then I did something I'd been wanting to do for longer than I cared to admit. I hung up, just pressed the red button, and ended the call like I was some kind of action hero delivering a one-liner before the dramatic scene cut. I stood there in aisle 7 holding my phone, staring at the circuit breakers, and I felt lighter than I had in years, like I'd been carrying around an invisible backpack full of rocks, and had finally just shrugged it off and let it fall to the floor. I walked back to the break room where my coworker Dennis was eating a sandwich and scrolling through his phone. You okay, man? He asked, probably noticing the slightly manic look on my face. You look like you just won the lottery or committed a crime. I can't tell which. Both? I said, pouring myself a cup of the terrible break room coffee that tastes like it was brewed in a tire factory. I just committed the crime of setting boundaries. And the prize is my sanity. I sat down at the plastic table that had seen better days, probably around the same time I'd still had a functional relationship with my daughter, and took a sip of coffee that tasted like freedom mixed with discount beans. Dennis, let me tell you something. Don't have kids. Or if you do have kids, make sure you stop paying their bills before they start thinking of you as a human credit card instead of a human being. Dennis nodded slowly, the way you nod at someone who might be having a breakdown, but you're not quite sure yet. Noted, he said. That's some specific advice. That evening I sat by the window in my recliner, the same spot where I'd been doing most of my contemplating lately, watching the sun go down and turning the sky into this painting of oranges and purples that reminded me that the world keeps turning whether your daughter appreciates you or not. Clara brought me a beer without me asking for one, which is the kind of thing that happens when you've been married long enough that your spouse develops psychic abilities about when you need alcohol. I took it and whispered to myself, quiet enough that Clara couldn't hear, but loud enough that it felt real. This tastes like freedom. And you know what? It really did. That afternoon, I decided it was time to do something I'd been avoiding for approximately 3 years, which was taking a good hard look at exactly how much money I'd poured into the black hole of my daughter's financial needs. Not because I'm a masochist, though at this point I was starting to wonder, but because I needed to see the damage in black and white, needed to quantify exactly how much my unconditional love had cost in actual dollars and cents. It's like when you avoid checking your credit card statement after a particularly irresponsible shopping spree. Except this shopping spree had lasted for 3 years, and I hadn't even gotten to keep any of the stuff I'd bought. I spread out everything across the dining room table, like I was conducting an autopsy on my own wallet, which I guess in a way I was. Bank statements, credit card receipts, copies of checks I'd written, Venmo transactions that I'd screenshotted, because even then some part of me knew I should be keeping records of this insanity. There were rent receipts going back 36 months in a neat little stack that looked like a monument to my own stupidity. Grocery bills from all those times Leah had called saying she was broke and needed help with food, which somehow always coincided with her posting Instagram photos from trendy brunch spots that charged $18 for avocado toast. Loan repayments for student debt that I later discovered had actually been paid off 2 years ago, but she'd just kept accepting my help because I guess when someone's dumb enough to keep giving you money, you don't exactly stop them. Then there were the more creative expenses, the ones that really showcased Leah's talent for storytelling. The emergency puppy surgery that supposedly saved her neighbor's dog, which cost me $800 and which I'm now about 70% sure never actually happened, because I never saw any photos of this miraculous recovery, and Leah's not exactly the type to save a dog's life and not post about it for the social media clout. The spa trips that were marketed to me as essential mental health care, because apparently my generation doesn't understand that self-care costs $200 and involves hot stones and eucalyptus steam rooms. The business equipment for Travis's various entrepreneurial ventures, which as far as I could tell involved him sitting on the couch with an expensive laptop posting about cryptocurrency and hustle culture while contributing exactly $0 to their household expenses. I pulled out my calculator, the same one I'd been using since 1987 that still worked perfectly fine despite Clara's insistence that I could just use my phone, and I started adding it all up. Rent payments, $1,200 a month for 36 months. Insurance premiums. Utility bills that somehow I'd gotten roped into covering. Emergency car repairs for a car that seemed to have more emergencies than a daytime soap opera. Medical copays. Dental work. That time she needed a new laptop because hers had died suddenly, which I later learned meant she'd spilled an entire glass of wine on it during a party. The security deposits for 3 different apartments because she kept deciding she didn't like the vibes of various neighborhoods, which is apparently something people get to do when they're not the ones paying for it. The calculator kept climbing, the numbers getting bigger and more depressing with each entry. 5,000, 10,000, 20,000. I kept going, my hand getting crampier with each button press, sweat starting to form on my forehead even though the air conditioning was on full blast. 25,000, 30,000, 34,000. I hit the total button one final time and stared at the number like it was going to change if I looked at it long enough, like maybe I'd made a mistake, and it was actually $34 instead of $34,600. $34,600. I sat back in my chair and just stared at that number, letting it really sink in, letting it marinate in my brain until I could fully appreciate the magnitude of my own financial stupidity. I could have bought a Tesla, I muttered to myself, thinking about that sleek electric car I'd been eyeing for the past year, the one Clara kept saying we should splurge on because we'd earned it after decades of being responsible. Instead, I bought entitlement. I bought a 3-year subscription to being taken advantage of. I invested heavily in the stock market of ungratefulness, and somehow I'm shocked that the returns were terrible. I looked at all those receipts spread across my dining room table and felt something shift inside me, some final piece of denial crumbling into dust. This wasn't parenting. This wasn't helping my kid get on her feet. This was enabling, pure and simple, and I'd been doing it with a smile on my face while she systematically drained my retirement savings and didn't even have the decency to invite me to her wedding. I grabbed my phone and did something that felt simultaneously petty and absolutely necessary. I took a photo of all the receipts spread out on the table, this colorful mosaic of my own gullibility, and I sent it to Leah with a message that probably wasn't going to win me any Father of the Year awards, but felt absolutely perfect in the moment. In case you ever miss me, I typed, just look at your furniture. Look at your dishes. Look at your walls and your floors and your ceiling. I'm literally everywhere. Every stick of furniture, every plate you eat off of, every light bulb illuminating your special life. That's all me. You're basically living in a museum dedicated to my poor financial decisions. Enjoy the exhibit. I hit send before I could second-guess myself, and then I did something that felt even better. I grabbed my keys, got in my car, and drove straight to First National Bank like I was on a mission from God. The bank where I'd set up all those automatic payments 3 years ago when Leah had first asked for help, back when I was naive enough to think this would be temporary, that she just needed a little boost to get started in life. Back when I still believed that being a good father meant saying yes to everything and never expecting anything in return except maybe the occasional phone call that wasn't about money. I walked through those automatic doors with the kind of determination usually reserved for people storming castles or quitting terrible jobs in spectacular fashion. Mr. Khan was at his desk, the same bank manager who'd helped me set up the automatic transfers, a nice guy in his 50s who always remembered my name and asked about my family, which now felt ironic given what I was about to do. He looked up and smiled when he saw me approaching. Mr. Anders, good to see you. What can I help you with today? Cancel every automatic payment to Leah and her husband, I said without preamble, pulling out my phone to show him the account details. Every single one. Rent, utilities, insurance, everything. If it's going to either of them, I want it stopped immediately. Mr. Khan blinked at me, his fingers hovering over his keyboard like he wasn't sure he'd heard me correctly. Sir, you've never missed a payment in 3 years. These are all scheduled to go out like clockwork. Are you sure you want to cancel them? Is there a problem with the amounts? The problem, I said, and I could feel this smile spreading across my face that probably made me look slightly unhinged, but I didn't care, is that I've spent 3 years being an ATM for someone who thinks I'm not special enough to attend her wedding. The problem is I just calculated that I've given away $34,600 to someone who only calls me when she needs something. The problem is I finally realized that my biggest character flaw isn't being cheap or stingy or whatever else people have called me over the years. My biggest character flaw is that I'm too generous with people who don't deserve it. Mr. Khan looked at me for a long moment, and I saw something change in his expression, this flicker of understanding like he'd just connected some dots. My daughter asked me for $5,000 last month for a down payment on a car, he said quietly, pulling up my account on his screen. I said no because she still owes me $2,000 from last year. She didn't talk to me for a week. He started clicking through menus, his fingers moving efficiently across the keyboard. I'm canceling all automatic payments now, Mr. Anders. Every single one. I watched him work, feeling this weight lifting off my shoulders with each confirmation number he read out to me. Payment canceled. Payment canceled. Payment canceled. It was like listening to a surgeon announce that they'd successfully removed a tumor, each cancellation making me lighter and freer and more like myself than I'd felt in years. When he was done, he printed out a confirmation sheet and slid it across the desk to me, and I looked at it like it was a diploma or a medal or some kind of official document declaring my independence. Is there anything else I can help you with today? Mr. Khan asked, And there was this hint of a smile on his face, like he knew exactly what I was going through because he'd been there himself in some version of this same story. Actually, yeah, I said, folding up the confirmation sheet and putting it in my wallet like a talisman against future weakness. I want to set up a new automatic payment to my own savings account. Same amount I was paying for Leah's rent. $1,200 a month, starting today. Mr. Khan's smile got wider. Now that, he said, is the best financial decision you've made in a while. I walked out of that bank like a man who'd just divorced his direct debit, like I'd ended a toxic relationship with being taken advantage of, and for the first time in a week, I felt something that wasn't just anger or disappointment or betrayal. I felt hopeful. I felt free. I felt like maybe, just maybe, I could finally start living for myself instead of funding someone else's life while mine passed me by. A few days later, I came home from the hardware store feeling pretty good about life, which should have been my first warning sign that the universe was about to remind me that happiness is temporary and chaos is always lurking around the corner, waiting to ruin your afternoon. I'd spent the day helping a nice elderly woman pick out paint colors for her bathroom remodel, and she'd reminded me of my own mother with her polite questions and genuine appreciation for help, which was refreshing after dealing with my own family, who seemed to think gratitude was a foreign language they'd never learned to speak. The sun was shining. I had a sandwich waiting for me in the fridge, and I was planning to spend the evening watching baseball and not thinking about my ungrateful daughter for at least 3 consecutive hours. Then I turned onto my street and immediately felt my good mood evaporate like water on hot asphalt. There were 3 strange cars parked in front of my house. Expensive-looking vehicles that definitely didn't belong to any of my neighbors who mostly drove sensible sedans and the occasional minivan. A sleek black Mercedes that probably cost more than I made in a year. A silver Lexus SUV with custom rims that screamed, "I make poor financial decisions." And a white BMW that had one of those vanity plates that said something obnoxious like WANR or success, or whatever lawyers put on their cars to announce their profession to everyone stuck behind them in traffic. My stomach immediately dropped into my shoes because I just knew with every fiber of my being that whatever was happening inside my house was going to make me want to commit a felony. I parked my truck in the driveway behind the Mercedes, effectively blocking it in because petty spite is free and I'm budget conscious, and walked up to my own front door with all the enthusiasm of a man approaching a firing squad. I could hear voices inside. Multiple people talking in that fake polite tone that people use when they're about to screw you over but want to pretend they're doing you a favor. I opened the door, which wasn't locked because apparently we were having an open house that nobody bothered to tell me about, and froze in the doorway like I'd just walked into a surprise party, except instead of friends and cake, it was my worst nightmare come to life. Leah was sitting on my couch like she owned the place, which technically I guess she thought she did since I'd been funding her entire existence for the past 3 years. Travis was next to her doing that thing where he tries to look serious and important by crossing his arms and frowning. But mostly he just looked like a kid playing dress-up in grown-up clothes. And sitting at my dining room table, the same table where I'd just conducted my financial autopsy a few days ago, was a man in a shiny suit that probably cost more than my entire wardrobe, including shoes and my one decent winter coat. He had that slick look that screams lawyer, all perfect hair, an expensive watch, and the kind of smile that makes you want to count your fingers after shaking his hand to make sure they're all still there. "Dad," Leah began in that sugar-sweet voice that I now recognized as her manipulation tone, the one she probably practiced in the mirror before important phone calls. "We've been so worried about you. You've been acting so strange lately, so erratic and unpredictable, cutting us off without warning, saying cruel things, making irrational financial decisions. We think you might be experiencing some cognitive decline, and we just want to help." I stood there in my own doorway, still holding my keys, trying to process the absolute audacity of what I was witnessing. Cognitive decline. She was actually standing in my house, the house I paid for, suggesting that I was losing my mind because I'd stopped bankrolling her lifestyle. The nerve of this woman who I'd raised and loved and apparently completely failed to teach the meaning of basic human decency was truly breathtaking in its shamelessness. The lawyer stood up and extended his hand like we were meeting at a networking event instead of him ambushing me in my own home. "Mr. Anders, I'm Jeffrey Bell, attorney at law. Your daughter and son-in-law have retained my services out of concern for your well-being. We're here today to discuss some arrangements that would ensure your finances are properly managed during this difficult time. Difficult time, I repeated, not shaking his hand, because I'm not a complete idiot and I know that lawyers don't make house calls for social reasons. The only difficult time I'm having is standing here in my own house wondering who the hell invited you people in. Mr. Bell reached for a leather folder on the table, the kind of folder that probably cost more than a normal person's monthly grocery budget, and pulled out a stack of papers that looked official and intimidating with all their legal letterhead and dense paragraphs of text designed to confuse regular people into signing away their rights. These are just some simple documents that would allow your daughter to help manage your financial affairs. Nothing major, just ensuring that bills are paid on time, investments are handled properly, that sort of thing. It's really for your own protection. I walked over to the table, picked up the folder with both hands like I was actually considering it, and then did something that felt so good it should probably be illegal. I walked it straight to the kitchen trash bin, the one that currently contained coffee grounds and banana peels and the remnants of last night's dinner, and dropped the entire folder right in on top of the garbage. The sound it made hitting the bottom of that trash can was probably the most satisfying sound I'd heard all week, even better than the click of Mr. Khan canceling those automatic payments. There, I said, turning back to face the three of them who were all staring at me with expressions ranging from shock to fury to what looked like genuine confusion that their plan wasn't working. Peace of mind restored. Consider my finances officially managed by me, myself, and I, the only people in this room who actually earn the money we're talking about. Leah's face went through about 17 different emotions in 3 seconds, finally landing on red-hot anger that made her look like she was about to start breathing fire. Dad, don't be difficult. We're trying to help you. You're clearly not thinking straight. You cut us off without any warning. You're making impulsive decisions. You're being hostile and paranoid. Difficult, I said, and I could feel this laugh building in my chest, the kind of laugh that comes from a place of pure disbelief at the absurdity of the situation. Sweetheart, let me tell you about difficult. Difficult is raising a child for 25 years. Difficult is working overtime to pay for college. Difficult is sacrificing vacations and new cars and retirement plans to make sure your kid has everything she needs. You know what's not difficult? Finally growing a spine and saying no to someone who thinks I'm an ATM with legs. Travis decided this was his moment to contribute, probably because Leah's face was getting so red I was worried she might actually explode. Mr. Anders, with all due respect, you're being unreasonable. We had an agreement. We planned our finances around your support. You can't just suddenly change the terms without discussion. Discussion, I said, turning to look at this man who'd married my daughter and immediately started treating my bank account like it was community property. You want to talk about discussion? How about we discuss why you've never had a real job in the 3 years I've known you? How about we discuss why I wasn't invited to your wedding, but my credit card was? How about we discuss what exactly you bring to this marriage besides expensive sneakers and motivational LinkedIn posts? The room went quiet in that way that happens when someone finally says what everyone's been thinking, but nobody had the guts to verbalize. Mr. Bell cleared his throat, probably calculating how much of his hourly rate he was going to bill for this disaster of a house call. Mr. Anders, perhaps we should schedule a more formal meeting. Emotions are clearly running high. No, I said, walking to the front door and opening it wide, letting in the afternoon sunlight and hopefully providing a clear visual cue that this little intervention was over. We're not scheduling anything. You're leaving. All of you. Right now. This is my house, bought with my money, maintained with my labor, and you're all trespassing. Leah stood up, grabbing her designer purse that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. You're going to regret this, she said, her voice low and threatening in a way that would have been intimidating if I hadn't spent the last week building up an immunity to her manipulation tactics. You'll die alone, old and bitter, and you'll realize too late that you pushed away the people who loved you. I looked at her standing there in my living room. This woman who I'd loved since the moment she was born, who I'd taught to ride a bike and helped with homework and walked through every milestone of her life. And I felt something break inside me that I knew wasn't going to heal anytime soon. Perfect, I said, and I smiled because at this point what else was I going to do, cry? I'd done enough of that already. I'll finally have peace and quiet, plus all the snacks to myself. No more sharing the good chips with people who only show up when they need something. They filed out one by one. Leah first with her head held high like she was the victim in this situation, Travis following behind looking like a puppy who'd been scolded but didn't understand why, and Mr. Bell last with his expensive briefcase and his probably astronomical bill for services rendered. I stood in the doorway and watched them get into their expensive cars, watched them drive away from my house like they were leaving a crime scene, which I guess in a way they were since they'd just attempted to legally steal my autonomy and financial independence. When the last car disappeared around the corner, I closed the door and leaned against it, suddenly exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with physical labor and everything to do with emotional warfare. Clara appeared from the bedroom where she'd apparently been hiding during the entire confrontation, and she looked at me with eyes that were both proud and concerned. "You okay?" she asked. "I just kicked my daughter out of my house," I said, sliding down to sit on the floor with my back against the door like I was barricading it against future invasions. I threw a lawyer's paperwork in the trash. I told my son-in-law he's useless. So yeah, I'm either okay or I'm having the breakdown they accused me of having. Honestly, at this point, I'm not sure there's a difference. Clara sat down next to me on the floor, something we probably wouldn't have done 10 years ago when our knees still worked properly, and she took my hand. "You did the right thing," she said quietly. "They were trying to take everything from you." "I know," I said, squeezing her hand and staring at the closed door like it was a shield between me and the chaos that my family had become. The scary part is how close I came to letting them. 3 days after I'd turned my living room into a crime scene by committing the heinous act of standing up for myself, I was in the garage attempting to fix Clara's old sewing machine that had been making concerning grinding noises like it was chewing gravel instead of fabric. I was elbow deep in mechanical parts that I only half understood, operating on pure stubbornness and a YouTube tutorial that kept buffering at the crucial moments, when I heard a car pull up in the driveway. Not just any car, but one of those official-sounding engines that immediately makes you think either you're getting a package or you're about to have a very bad day. And given my recent track record, I wasn't optimistic about the package scenario. I wiped my hands on a rag that was already so dirty it probably made them worse instead of better and walked to the driveway where a woman in a navy blazer was getting out of a sedan that had government plates and the kind of bland, forgettable appearance that screamed bureaucracy. She had a clipboard, which is never a good sign, and one of those smiles that people practice in customer service training where it doesn't quite reach their eyes, and you can tell they'd rather be literally anywhere else doing literally anything else. She looked like she was about to either sell me insurance I didn't need or ruin my week, and I was betting heavily on option 2. "Mr. Anders?" she asked, approaching me with that clipboard held in front of her like a shield against human interaction. She was wearing sensible shoes and had her hair pulled back in a way that suggested she'd given up on joy sometime around 2015 and had been running on coffee and resignation ever since. "I'm Margaret Foster from Social Services. We received some concerns about your well-being, and I'm here to conduct a welfare check." I just stared at her for a moment, letting the absolute audacity of the situation really sink in, marinating in the reality that my own daughter had apparently called social services on me like I was some kind of danger to myself or society. "Let me guess," I said, not even trying to hide the sarcasm dripping from every word. "These concerns came from my loving daughter who just tried to get me to sign over my finances to her and failed spectacularly?" Margaret Foster had the decency to look uncomfortable, shifting her weight from one sensible shoe to the other and glancing down at her clipboard like it might contain instructions for how to handle a situation where the person being investigated was clearly onto the scam. "I'm not at liberty to discuss the source of the complaint, Mr. Anders. I'm just here to ensure you're safe and able to care for yourself. It's standard procedure." "Standard procedure," I repeated, crossing my arms and probably looking like the world's most defensive mechanic covered in grease stains and righteous indignation. "Standard procedure for what, exactly? Making sure I haven't forgotten how to dress myself? Checking if I can still remember my own name? Because I assure you, Miss Foster, I am extremely aware of who I am and what's happening here, which is my daughter using government resources to harass me because I stopped funding her lifestyle." Clara appeared in the doorway of the garage, wiping her hands on a dish towel because apparently we'd both been interrupted in the middle of our respective projects. She took one look at the scene, at me covered in grease facing down a social worker, and I saw her face go through the same journey mine had just completed, from confusion to understanding to barely contained fury. "Is this about Leah?" she asked, her voice dangerously calm in the way that meant someone was about to get a piece of her mind, and it wasn't going to be pleasant. Ms. Foster opened her mouth to give what was probably a rehearsed speech about confidentiality and procedures, but I cut her off because I was done playing games with people who were trying to paint me as incompetent. "You know what? Come inside. Look around. Interview me. Check my vital signs. Give me a pop quiz on current events. Do whatever you need to do to confirm that I'm not drooling on myself or forgetting to wear pants. Then you can go back to whoever sent you here and tell them that their plan to have me declared incompetent has failed just as badly as their attempt to get me to sign legal documents while ambushed in my own home." We walked inside, Miss Foster trailing behind us with her clipboard and her growing awareness that this was not going to be the straightforward case of elder neglect or cognitive decline that she'd probably been told to expect. The house was clean, organized in that way that happens when retired people have too much time and not enough tolerance for clutter. The bills were stacked neatly on the counter, all paid and filed with dates written on them in my handwriting that was perfectly legible despite what my daughter might have suggested about my mental state. The refrigerator was full of actual food, not just condiments in mysterious containers from 2019. There were no safety hazards, no signs of hoarding, no indicators that I was anything other than a reasonably functional adult who was currently very annoyed. But I wasn't taking any chances, because I've learned over the past few weeks that people who want to paint you as incompetent will look for any excuse to make their narrative stick. So I did something that would have seemed paranoid 2 weeks ago, but now seemed absolutely essential to my continued freedom and autonomy. I called my lawyer. Not just any lawyer, but Mr. Patterson, the same guy who'd helped me draft my will 5 years ago, and who had the kind of unshakable calm that comes from dealing with family drama for 30 years. He was a man in his 60s who wore gray suits like they were a uniform, and had probably seen every variation of children trying to screw over their parents that existed in the legal handbook. I hit his number on speed dial, which I'd added after the invasion of the parasites because I'd learned that having a lawyer on retainer was apparently going to be necessary for basic survival. He picked up on the second ring with a voice that sounded like whiskey and courtrooms. "Mr. Anders, what's happening now?" "Social services is in my living room," I said, watching Miss Foster's expression shift from official procedure to mild alarm as she realized this was not going to be a simple home visit. "My daughter apparently called in a wellness check because I stopped paying her rent. I need you to come over here and help me document that I am, in fact, not senile, just surrounded by people who wish I was." "I'll be there in 20 minutes, he said without hesitation, and I heard the sound of keys jingling and a door closing. "Don't sign anything, don't agree to anything, and definitely don't let them take you anywhere for evaluation. I've seen this play before, and it never ends well for the parent." While we waited for Mr. Patterson to arrive like Batman in a Buick, I decided to make this as uncomfortable as possible for everyone involved by being aggressively competent. I offered Ms. Foster coffee, which I made properly in our French press, while discussing the optimal water temperature for extraction like I was some kind of caffeinated sommelier. I showed her our monthly budget spreadsheet on the computer, complete with color-coded categories and formulas that would make an accountant weep with joy. I recited the names and birthdays of all my grandchildren, even though Leah had been making it increasingly difficult to see them over the past year for reasons that were now becoming crystal clear. "Miss Foster," I said, sitting down across from her at the dining room table while Clara stood behind me with her arms crossed like a bodyguard made of pure maternal rage. "I understand you're just doing your job, but let me paint you a picture of what's actually happening here. My daughter got married and didn't invite me because I'm not special enough, despite the fact that I paid for her rent, her car insurance, her groceries, and approximately $34,600 worth of other expenses over the past 3 years. When I finally decided to stop being an ATM machine, she tried to get me to sign over power of attorney under the guise of concern for my mental health. When that didn't work, she apparently called you folks hoping you'd do her dirty work for her." Miss Foster was writing things down on her clipboard, and I couldn't tell if she was documenting my mental state or just taking notes on what was clearly becoming a much more complicated situation than she'd been briefed on. "Mr. Anders, can you tell me what day it is? Who's the current president?" Can you count backwards from 100 by sevens? I did all of it, perfectly, while maintaining eye contact and probably looking more alert and oriented than I had in years because spite is an excellent motivator. I counted backwards from 100 by sevens without hesitation, rattled off current events like I was a news anchor, and even threw in some historical facts for good measure, just to show off. By the time Mr. Patterson arrived, briefcase in hand and wearing his courtroom face, Miss Foster looked like she was starting to regret taking this assignment. Mr. Patterson didn't waste time with pleasantries. He sat down at the table, pulled out a folder that was somehow even more intimidating than the one the other lawyer had brought, and proceeded to present evidence of my competence like he was prosecuting a case against the very concept of my cognitive decline. Bank statements showing responsible financial management. Medical records from my doctor confirming I was in good health for my age. Receipts and documents proving that every single automatic payment I'd canceled had been voluntary and deliberate, not the random actions of a confused elderly person. Furthermore, Mr. Patterson said, sliding a piece of paper across the table to Ms. Foster like he was revealing evidence in a murder trial. We have documentation of Ms. Leah Anders and her husband Travis attempting to coerce Mr. Anders into signing legal documents that would have given them control of his finances. We have witnesses, we have dates, and we have a very clear pattern of financial exploitation that Mr. Anders recognized and rightfully put a stop to. Ms. Foster looked at the documents, then at me, then at Mr. Patterson, and I could see her mentally calculating how quickly she could get out of this situation and back to cases that were actually legitimate concerns instead of family drama disguised as elder care. Mr. Anders, she said finally, closing her folder with a definitive snap that sounded like the closing of a case file. I see no signs of cognitive impairment or inability to care for yourself. You are clearly of sound mind and capable of making your own decisions. I'll be noting in my report that this appears to be a family dispute rather than a legitimate welfare concern. I appreciate your thoroughness, I said, standing up to show her to the door because I was raised to be polite even to people who'd been sent to investigate my mental fitness. And I'm sorry you got dragged into this. For what it's worth, I'm sure you've got plenty of actual cases that need your attention, people who really do need help, and I hate that my daughter wasted your time with this nonsense. She nodded, looking relieved to be leaving, and paused at the door. Mr. Anders, off the record? I've been doing this job for 15 years. I've seen a lot of families, a lot of dynamics, a lot of people trying to take advantage of their elderly relatives. What I can tell you is that you're not the problem here. Your boundaries are healthy. Don't let anyone make you doubt that. After she left, I sat back down at the dining room table with Mr. Patterson and Clara, feeling exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with the sewing machine repairs I still needed to finish. My own child, I said quietly, staring at my hands that were still stained with grease from the garage. My own daughter tried to have me investigated by social services. That's a new low, even for her. Mr. Patterson packed up his briefcase with the efficiency of someone who'd done this 1,000 times. The good news is that it's all documented now. Every attempt she's made, every failed scheme, it's all on record. If she tries anything else, and I suspect she will because people like this don't give up easily, we'll have a paper trail that shows a clear pattern of harassment and attempted exploitation. That's supposed to be comforting? I asked, even though I knew he was right. No, he said, snapping his briefcase closed. But it's protective. And right now, Mr. Anders, protection is what you need. Your brain's the only thing in this family that's actually working properly. A week later, I was standing in my bedroom staring at my closet like it contained nuclear launch codes instead of decades-old dress shirts and pants that still fit if I didn't breathe too deeply, trying to figure out what exactly one wears to fight off your own daughter in court. The official notice had arrived 3 days ago via certified mail, which meant I had to sign for the privilege of learning that Leah and Travis had filed a petition for guardianship over me, claiming I was mentally incompetent and needed them to legally control every aspect of my life. They wanted to turn me into a living, breathing ATM card with dementia, complete with legal documentation and a judge's signature. Clara had ironed my best suit, the navy one I'd worn to my brother's funeral 5 years ago, and hadn't touched since because most occasions in my life don't require looking like I'm about to negotiate a corporate merger. She kept fussing with my tie, adjusting it, and readjusting it like if she got the not perfect somehow this whole nightmare would resolve itself. "You're going to be fine," she said for the 17th time that morning, but her hands were shaking and I could tell she was just as terrified as I was that somehow, impossibly, the legal system might side with two people who were clearly just after my money. Mr. Patterson picked us up in his sensible sedan that smelled like leather and legal victories. And during the drive to the courthouse, he briefed me again on what to expect, walking me through the process like a coach preparing an athlete for the championship game, except instead of a trophy, the prize was maintaining basic human autonomy. "They're going to paint you as confused, isolated, making irrational decisions. Their lawyer will probably be dramatic, might even have Leah cry on the stand. Your job is to stay calm, answer clearly, and remember that the truth is on your side. The judge has seen this before, and if we present our case properly, he'll see right through it." The courthouse was one of those intimidating buildings designed to make regular people feel small and insignificant, all marble columns and echoing hallways, and the kind of acoustic properties that make every footstep sound like a judgment. We went through security where I had to empty my pockets and take off my belt, which felt like adding insult to injury since I was already being forced to defend my own mental competence to strangers. The courtroom itself was smaller than I expected from watching legal dramas on TV, more like an oversized conference room with wood paneling and uncomfortable benches that were clearly designed by someone who believed suffering built character. Leah arrived 10 minutes after we did, dressed in all black like she was attending my funeral instead of trying to steal my life. And I had this dark moment of thinking that maybe that's exactly how she saw this, as the death of the father who said no and the birth of the controllable bank account she could manage without resistance. Travis was beside her in a suit that probably cost more than my mortgage payment, looking serious in that way that people who've never had real problems try to look when they're pretending to be concerned. Their lawyer was a woman in her 40s with sharp features and sharper heels, the kind of person who probably charged by the breath and made junior associates cry for sport. We all sat on opposite sides of the courtroom like this was the world's worst wedding, which I guess in a way it was since this was all a direct result of a wedding I hadn't been invited to. The bailiff called the court to order and Judge Collins entered, a man in his 60s with gray hair and reading glasses perched on his nose, and the expression of someone who'd been dealing with family dysfunction since before I was born and had long ago given up on humanity, surprising him with anything new. Leah's lawyer stood up first, smoothing her skirt and arranging her face into an expression of practiced concern that probably played well with juries, but looked fake as hell to anyone paying attention. "Your Honor, we're here today because a daughter loves her father so much that she's willing to take on the difficult responsibility of his care. Mr. Anders has been exhibiting concerning behavior, isolating himself from family, making impulsive financial decisions, refusing help from those who care about him most. His daughter fears that without intervention, he'll be vulnerable to exploitation or worse." I had to physically bite my tongue to keep from laughing out loud at the sheer audacity of someone claiming I was vulnerable to exploitation while simultaneously trying to exploit me in a court of law. Clara grabbed my hand and squeezed hard enough that I worried about my circulation, which I interpreted as a nonverbal message to not get us thrown out of court before we even got to present our side. Then Leah took the stand, and I watched my daughter transform into an actress worthy of an Academy Award nomination. Her voice got soft and trembling. Her eyes welled up with tears that might have been real or might have been the result of staring at the courtroom lights without blinking. And she spoke about her concerns with the kind of conviction that would have been moving if I didn't know for a fact that her biggest concern was losing access to my bank account. "My father has always been such a loving, generous man," she said, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue that Travis helpfully provided like they'd rehearsed this moment. "But lately he's been different, paranoid, angry, cutting us off without explanation. He hangs up on me when I call. He refuses to see reason. He's making decisions that don't make sense." Her lawyer nodded sympathetically, playing to the judge like they were in a performance of Concerned Professionals Care About Old People, the musical. They showed examples of my erratic behavior, which apparently included canceling automatic payments that I'd set up voluntarily, refusing to sign legal documents when ambushed in my home, and generally not doing exactly what Leah wanted exactly when she wanted it. Travis got called up next and did his best impression of a worried son-in-law, talking about how I'd changed, how I wasn't the man he'd known, completely glossing over the fact that the man he'd known had been a walking wallet and the man I'd become had been a walking wallet that finally grew a spine. I leaned over to Mr. Patterson and whispered, "If this goes wrong, remind me to get her an audition for Days of Our Lives. She's wasting this talent on just screwing over her family." He didn't smile, but I saw his eyes crinkle slightly at the corners, which from a lawyer is basically the equivalent of standing ovation. During cross-examination, Mr. Patterson stood up with the kind of calm confidence that comes from knowing you're holding all the winning cards and the other side is bluffing with a pair of twos. "Ms. Anders," he said, his voice polite, but carrying an edge that suggested he was about to dismantle her entire performance with facts and logic. "When was the last time you spoke to your father without asking for money?" The question hung in the air like smoke, and I watched Leah's face go through several expressions as she tried to calculate whether lying would be better than admitting the truth. She blinked, opened her mouth, closed it again, looking like a fish that had just realized it was out of water and the situation was not improving. We talk about lots of things," she finally managed, but her voice had lost that confident, trembling quality and now just sounded uncertain. "That's not what I asked," Mr. Patterson continued, and I was starting to understand why people paid this man probably obscene amounts of money to represent them. "I asked for a specific date, a specific conversation where you called your father just to check in, just to talk, without any financial request attached. Can you provide one?" Silence. Beautiful, damning silence that spoke volumes about exactly what our relationship had become over the past 3 years. Leah looked at her lawyer, who was suddenly very interested in her legal pad, and then back at Mr. Patterson like she was hoping he'd forgotten the question. He hadn't. "And is it true," he followed up, moving in for what was clearly going to be the killing blow, "that you told your father he wasn't special enough to attend your wedding? Your own father, who you now claim to be so concerned about." That was taken out of context, Leah stammered, and now the tears were gone, and she just looked angry, which was probably closer to her actual emotional state than the concerned daughter routine she'd been performing. "I didn't mean it like that. It was a small wedding. We had limited space." "Limited space, Mr. Patterson repeated, pulling out a photo from his briefcase, like a magician pulling a rabbit from a hat, except, instead of entertainment, it was evidence. "This is a photo from your wedding posted on social media. I count 47 guests. Are you telling this court that out of 47 people, there wasn't room for the man who paid for your rent, your car insurance, and according to our calculations, approximately $34,600 worth of expenses over 3 years?" The courtroom got very quiet, the kind of quiet that happens when everyone collectively realizes they're witnessing someone's argument fall apart in real time. Even Judge Collins looked up from his notes with renewed interest, his eyebrows doing that thing where they climb up his forehead like they're trying to escape the situation. "Of course there was room," I muttered under my breath, but apparently not quiet enough because a few people in the gallery behind us chuckled, and I saw the judge hide what might have been a smile behind his hand. When it was my turn to take the stand, my hands were shaking, but my mind was clear, clearer than it had been in months, honestly, because anger and righteous indignation are apparently excellent at cutting through brain fog. I looked at the judge, at this stranger who held my future in his hands, and I told him the truth. "Your Honor, I raised my daughter with love, patience, and apparently a limitless credit card that I didn't realize I'd signed up for. I worked overtime to pay for her college. I helped with her rent when she said she was struggling. I bought her boyfriend's business equipment when he claimed he was starting a company. I funded every crisis, every emergency, every need that came up for 3 solid years because that's what parents do, right? We help our kids." I took a breath, aware that everyone in the courtroom was listening, that this was my chance to either save myself or sound exactly as crazy as Leah had painted me. "But I'm not senile, Your Honor. I'm not confused or mentally declining or any of the things I'm being accused of. I'm just tired. I'm tired of being valued only for my bank account. I'm tired of phone calls that only come when rent is due. I'm tired of being called not special enough to attend my own daughter's wedding, but special enough to pay for it. I'm not making irrational decisions. I'm making the most rational decision of my life. I'm choosing to stop being financially exploited by someone who stopped seeing me as a father and started seeing me as an ATM that occasionally gives unwanted advice. A few people in the gallery actually applauded until the bailiff gave them a look that suggested that was deeply inappropriate for a courtroom setting, but the judge didn't seem to mind. He was writing things down, nodding occasionally, and I couldn't tell if that was good or bad, but at least he seemed to be actually listening instead of just waiting for me to finish so he could rule against me. Mr. Patterson wasn't done demolishing their case, and honestly watching him work was like witnessing a surgeon perform an operation, except instead of removing a tumor, he was removing any credibility Leah had left in that courtroom. He presented bank statements showing every payment I'd made over 3 years, each one documented and deliberate, proving I had perfect control of my finances right up until the moment I decided to stop hemorrhaging money to ungrateful relatives. He showed text messages where Leah only contacted me about money, never about how I was doing or whether I needed anything or just to say hello like a normal human daughter might do. Then came the real bombshell, the evidence I didn't even know we had until Mr. Patterson pulled it out like he was revealing the murder weapon in an Agatha Christie novel. He called up the pharmacist from the drugstore near Leah's apartment, a nervous-looking guy in his 30s named Kevin who clearly wished he was anywhere else but had been subpoenaed and didn't have a choice. Turns out Leah had convinced this poor guy to sign a statement saying I seemed confused when picking up my prescriptions, that I couldn't remember what medications I was taking, that I appeared disoriented and potentially unsafe. The problem with that story, as Kevin reluctantly admitted under oath while avoiding eye contact with everyone, was that I'd never actually been to that pharmacy. Not once. Leah had asked him to sign the statement as a favor, told him it was to help her father get the care he needed, and Kevin had been dumb enough to do it without verifying any of the information because apparently professional ethics are optional when a pretty girl asks nicely. The whole courtroom seemed to inhale collectively, that universal gasp of, oh damn, someone just got caught lying in a really spectacular way. Judge Collins's eyebrows were now fully at his hairline, possibly considering making a permanent move there given how this case was going. Judge Collins leaned forward in his chair with the expression of a man who'd seen enough BS to last several lifetimes and was about to dispense some justice that would probably make him feel better about humanity, or at least slightly less pessimistic. He removed his glasses, cleaned them with a cloth from his robe pocket in that dramatic way judges do when they're about to say something important, and looked directly at Leah and Travis like he was a teacher catching students cheating on the final exam. Mr. Anders is clearly of sound mind, he said, his voice carrying that authoritative tone that comes from decades of dealing with people's worst behavior. In fact, he appears to be one of the more mentally competent people I've seen in this courtroom, which given some of the cases I've presided over is saying something. This petition is denied. Furthermore, this is a textbook case of attempted financial exploitation, and I'm frankly appalled that we're all here wasting the court's time and taxpayer money on what amounts to a family squabble over someone refusing to be a personal ATM anymore. The gavel came down with a sound that felt like vindication mixed with the ending credits of a movie where the good guy finally wins. Boom. Case closed. Petition denied. I exhaled for what felt like the first time in months, like I'd been holding my breath underwater and finally broke the surface. Clara grabbed my hand so hard I thought she might break fingers, but I didn't care because we'd won. We'd actually won, and my daughter's scheme to legally steal my autonomy had just exploded in her face in front of a judge and a courtroom full of witnesses. Leah's eyes burned with fury as she gathered her designer purse, her face the color of a fire engine having a bad day. She leaned in as she passed me, her voice low and venomous enough to kill plants. You'll regret this. You'll die alone, old and miserable, with nobody who cares about you. I smiled, genuinely smiled for the first time in weeks. Perfect. I'll finally have peace and quiet. Plus all the snacks to myself. No more sharing the good chips with people who only show up when they need rent money. Months later, I was sitting in my new apartment downtown, a cozy 2-bedroom place that didn't smell like betrayal or decades of accumulated family dysfunction, sipping coffee that I'd made exactly how I liked it without anyone complaining that I made it too strong or too weak or asking why I couldn't just buy a Keurig like normal people. The place had hardwood floors that creaked in a charming way instead of an alarming way, windows that actually opened to let in fresh air, and neighbors who smiled, and said hello instead of trying to get me declared mentally incompetent so they could steal my retirement fund. Clara and I had sold the old house, the one with too many rooms and too many memories of raising a daughter who apparently saw us as an unlimited funding source rather than actual human beings with feelings and financial limitations. We'd split the profit, paid off the last of our debts, and moved into this smaller space that felt more like freedom than any mansion ever could. Turned out we didn't need all that square footage anyway. We'd just been filling it with stuff we didn't need to avoid thinking about relationships that weren't working. I joined a local seniors club that met every Tuesday and Thursday at the community center, a group of people in their 60s and 70s who'd lived full lives and had stories that made mine look tame by comparison. They'd asked me to speak one evening about my experience, and when I stood up in front of 25 people holding coffee cups and cookies from the discount bakery, I started with the line that got the biggest laugh I'd heard in years. My daughter once told me I was special, right before she tried to steal my retirement and have me declared legally incompetent. So I guess I'm here to tell you about the warning signs of financial elder abuse, featuring the cautionary tale of a guy who thought paying rent for 3 years would buy him a seat at a wedding. The room erupted with laughter and knowing nods from people who'd clearly been through their own versions of family dysfunction. An older woman named Dorothy came up to me afterward and said, "My son tried the same thing. Wanted power of attorney, said it was just to help with bills. Thank God my lawyer caught it before I signed anything." We traded war stories like veterans from the same battle. This army of parents who'd learned the hard way that generosity, without boundaries, is just enabling with better PR. These days I drank my coffee without guilt, a revolutionary concept that I was still getting used to after years of feeling like every dollar I spent on myself was somehow stealing from my daughter's future. I'd started traveling to places I'd always wanted to see, but never could because there was always some emergency that needed funding. I'd been to Nashville, saw the Grand Canyon, spent a week in Charleston eating seafood, and walking on beaches that didn't judge me for finally putting myself first. I'd even started flirting harmlessly with my neighbor Margaret, a retired math teacher who laughed at my terrible jokes and didn't ask for money, which was refreshing enough to qualify as a legitimate relationship upgrade. Then one evening my phone buzzed with a message from Leah, the first contact in months. "Dad, we need to talk." I stared at those 4 words, thinking about all the times I'd dropped everything to respond to her, all the times I'd rearranged my life to accommodate her needs, all the years I'd spent being available and generous and apparently completely taken for granted. I typed back slowly, deliberately, choosing each word like I was crafting the most important message of my life. Begin with an apology, not an amount. Then I muted the conversation, turned off my phone notifications for her number specifically, and went back to my book. Later that evening, I stood on my balcony watching the city lights sparkle below like earthbound stars, the sounds of traffic and life, and people living their messy, complicated existences floating up from the streets. I raised a glass of whiskey to the sky, the good stuff that I'd bought without checking the price tag because I'd earned it, and said to no one in particular, but really to myself and the universe and anyone else who might be listening. Here's to all the unspecial people who finally learned the price of peace. Turns out it costs exactly $34,600 and one daughter's entitlement. Best investment I ever made. The whiskey tasted like freedom, like self-respect, like all those years of being taken advantage of finally transforming into something valuable. The knowledge that I deserved better, that saying no wasn't cruel, and that the only person responsible for my happiness was me. And you know what? That was pretty damn special after all.